I never expected to feel so uneasy inside my own home. I moved in because the price was ridiculously low, and because I'm a locksmith by trade, I didn't mind the strange detail about the doors having no locks. The landlord never explained why they used heavy weights behind the doors instead. I figured I could just install my own locks, so I didn't press him for answers. I was in a rush to save on rent, and I wanted to settle quickly. The house itself looked normal. Single story, small yard, a few trees out back. But I noticed right away it felt empty in some uncomfortable way, like it had been uninhabited for a while. I saw a few scuffs on the floors, and the walls had marks at the level where doorknobs would normally scrape. That didn't bother me at first. I assumed the previous tenants had just been rough with the place. I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. I installed brand new locks on every door on my very first night. I tested them, made sure the keys worked, then locked everything and went to bed. That was the start of something I still can't fully explain. When I woke up the next morning, my front door was wide open. My bedroom door, my kitchen door, and the back door, they were all unlocked. The locks weren't damaged. Nothing was forced. It was as though I had left them unlocked on purpose. I knew that couldn't be the case, so I felt a jolt in my stomach. My heart started pounding a bit. I looked around outside. No footprints, no sign of anyone. I walked around the house, checking the doors from the outside. All the locks were intact, just turned to the unlocked position. It's almost impossible for them all to pop open on their own. I tested each mechanism, and it worked perfectly. At that moment, I felt a sense of doubt. I asked myself if maybe I had been so tired the night before that I forgot to lock them after installing them. It seemed unlikely, but I tried to brush it off. I went through each door again, locking them carefully. I made sure everything was secure before leaving for work that day. That night I got home and checked the locks again. All good. Everything was locked as I had left it. I made dinner, watched some TV, and decided to call it an early night. I was still exhausted from the move. Before turning in, I walked around the house one more time, testing each handle, turning each key, confirming it was locked. The sound of each lock clicking shut was comforting. I felt a sense of control. Then I went to bed, still a bit uneasy but determined to shrug it off. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a clicking noise. It sounded like a key turning in a lock. I shot up in bed. My heart was racing. I stood there in the dark, listening. Another soft click. It was coming from the kitchen door. I swung my legs out of bed and rushed toward the kitchen, not even bothering with shoes or a robe. As I moved, I heard the unmistakable sound of a door swinging open. It wasn't loud, but in the silence of the night, every small noise felt amplified. My mouth was dry. I flicked on the hallway light and grabbed the first thing I saw, a broom leaning against the wall. I stepped into the kitchen, my hand shaking on the broom handle. The kitchen door was open a few inches. I expected to see someone there, but the doorway was empty. I peered through the gap, switched on the back porch light, and saw nothing. Nobody was outside. I can't explain the chill that spread over me. The lock was still intact. No sign of forced entry. I moved the door back and forth, testing how smoothly it swung. Everything felt normal except for the knot of fear in my stomach. I shut the door and locked it again. Then I checked the rest of the doors. They were all closed but unlocked. That hammered home the strangeness of it all. Someone or something had unlocked them without using force. I almost wanted to call the landlord right then, but it was the middle of the night. I settled for relocking everything, then returning to bed. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept staring at the ceiling, wondering what I missed. The next morning, I woke up feeling tense and groggy. Sunlight came through the window and I realized I hadn't heard any more sounds after locking everything again. I got up, walked around the house, and found all the doors still locked the way I'd left them a few hours earlier. That gave me a small bit of relief. My mind started rationalizing it as a malfunction in that one lock. I decided to switch it out completely. I removed the kitchen door lock and replaced it with a higher quality model from my workshop. I spent a couple of hours on it, making sure everything aligned perfectly. By the end, I felt more confident. The third night, I tried to go about my routine without thinking too much about the previous events. I cooked, ate, and tried watching a comedy show to calm my nerves. Around 11, I did my usual lock check. All 4 doors locked tight. I went to bed with a mild headache, probably from stress. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up abruptly. I wasn't sure why. No obvious noise or movement, but I felt this intense sensation that someone was watching me. My skin crawled. My muscles felt tight. I squinted into the darkness of my bedroom and realized the door was closed, just as I had left it. But something was off about the darkness around the door frame. It took a second for my eyes to adjust. I saw what looked like a silhouette, a person's shape, standing just outside the bedroom door, peeking in through the barely visible gap. My heart pounded so hard I felt lightheaded. I jumped up and flicked on the bedside lamp. The silhouette vanished in an instant. I lunged toward the bedroom door, yanked it open, and found the hallway empty. My legs felt shaky. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Every door in the house was open again. I saw that the kitchen door was slightly ajar, the living room door was wide open, and even the front door was open enough that I could see the front porch light. I felt a wave of confusion. I knew I had locked everything. I checked those locks methodically. Now I was standing in my boxers in the middle of the hallway, my heart racing, my mind spinning, wondering how in the world any person could do all this without making more noise. I considered the possibility of some advanced lock-picking skills, but I'm a locksmith. I would have noticed scratch marks or tampering. I saw nothing. Every door was in perfect condition, just unlocked. I spent the rest of that night pacing around, making sure nobody was inside. I opened closets, looked under furniture, checked every corner. Nothing. No sign of an intruder. I locked all the doors again, but I had trouble sleeping after that. My mind wouldn't stop replaying that silhouette. At times, I wondered if I was hallucinating, but I was sure I saw someone. The next day, I confronted the landlord about the odd design of the doors, and he just shrugged, claiming he never had any problems and that the weights behind the doors were a quirk of the house. I insisted that something strange was happening, but he kept dodging my questions. He didn't seem particularly surprised, but he also didn't offer any useful information. It was frustrating, but I decided to let it go and focus on a final solution. I switched all the locks again. I brought out the best ones I had. I even reinforced the frames. Nothing else in the house seemed unusual. Wiring was fine, windows were normal, no hidden entrances. By the time I finished, I felt physically drained, but a little calmer. I figured if this happened again, I had no clue what else to try. On the 4th night, I decided to stay awake. I didn't even bother getting into bed. I sat on a chair in my bedroom, facing the door. The blinds were shut, and I only had a small lamp on in the corner to keep it from being pitch dark. I had a bottle of water and a snack on the bedside table. My plan was simple. I'd listen for any click or any movement. If something started unlocking the doors, I wanted to catch it in the act. I kept a flashlight and my cell phone in my lap, ready to go. Midnight passed slowly. I heard the old refrigerator humming. I heard the occasional pop of the wooden walls as the temperature dropped outside. Every small sound made me tense up. Around 2 a.m. I was still sitting there, fighting drowsiness. My eyes felt heavy, and my neck was stiff. By 3 a.m., I started to hear faint clicks. It wasn't coming from just one door. It sounded like multiple locks were being undone at the same time. My heart pounded. My mouth went dry. I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak. Another series of clicks came from the hallway. I had no logical explanation. I felt sweat building under my arms. I inched toward my bedroom door, holding the flashlight. I was breathing fast, and my hands were shaking. Then I noticed a shadow under the door, like someone was standing on the other side. I froze. The doorknob started to turn. I could see the metal piece shifting back and forth, like someone was carefully unlocking it. I couldn't move. It was as though my body was stuck to the floor. My heart thumped so loud I thought it might explode. I remember having a spinning feeling in my head. The knob made a small creak, and the door started opening by an inch or so. I felt a surge of panic in my chest, and everything went black. The next thing I remember, I was waking up to bright sunlight cutting through my closed blinds. My mouth tasted bitter. My neck was sore from where I'd slumped over in the chair. The door to my bedroom stood wide open. The rest of the doors in the house were also open, like before. I rubbed my eyes, trying to piece together what happened. My flashlight was on the floor, the battery's dead. My phone still had battery, but there were no calls or messages. Everything in the house looked untouched except for the wide open doors. I tested the locks, and they still worked fine when I turned them manually. That realization made my hands start shaking again. It told me this wasn't just a weird dream. Something had definitely been messing with the locks while I was conscious. I spent maybe 10 minutes stumbling around, checking each room with a sense of dread. I half expected to see someone crouching in a corner, but the house was empty. I felt shaky, tired, and fed up. I tossed some clothes and tools into a bag and got out of there as fast as I could. I left the doors exactly as they were, open. I didn't look back. I never bothered asking the landlord for any explanations or my money back. I just wanted to leave. To this day, I'm still not sure if what I experienced was real or if I was overworked and hallucinating. But I know what I saw. I know how those locks work. They aren't supposed to open themselves, and no normal person would manage to do that without leaving evidence. My body's reaction, the sweat, the shivers, the tightness in my chest, none of that felt imagined. Even now, whenever I lock a door, I feel a slight panic, like I'm back in that house, listening for a strange click in the dark. That place got under my skin in a way I can't fully explain. All I know is I never want to experience anything like that again. And if anyone ever offers me a place that cheap, I'll think twice before walking through the front door. I first saw that armchair at a weekend auction in a dusty warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place smelled like mildew and old cardboard, and the overhead lights flickered every few minutes. I was tired from a long drive, and I had a headache from standing around all afternoon. But when I turned and spotted that vintage armchair, my entire focus shifted. It had a worn burgundy upholstery with faint patterns on the arms and backrest. The wood along the frame looked dull, but I could tell it was high quality. It was under a dim light and nobody else seemed interested. I moved toward it and felt a tightness in my chest that I couldn't explain. It felt like the chair was calling to me. I'm not the kind of person who believes in energies or supernatural stuff. I just saw a unique piece of furniture that needed the right hands. I'm a furniture restorer by trade. I've worked on old chairs, tables, and cabinets for nearly a decade. I know the difference between real antique craftsmanship and fake reproductions. The moment I touched the armrest, I sensed this was genuine. The smooth curve under my fingers told me someone had spent a lot of time carving and sanding. My gut told me I had to bid on it. So, I did. I offered a modest price. No one challenged me, which was odd because items like that usually attract collectors. The auctioneer gave me a quick nod, and the chair was mine. I felt a rush of satisfaction. I didn't suspect anything unusual at that moment. I packed it into the back of my van and drove home. While unloading, I noticed a faint creaking sound, like the chair's wood was settling. It wasn't that strange. Old chairs sometimes groan when you move them. I shrugged it off and carried it into my workshop. My workshop is a small converted garage with shelves of varnishes, sandpaper, and various tools. I set the chair in the middle of the room and stared at it. There was a slight smell, almost like old perfume and dust. My eyes lingered on the armrests. The finish was peeling, and the cloth on the seat had some small rips. Still, I felt that urge to keep it for myself instead of refurbishing it to sell. Over the next few days, I did some light cleaning. I didn't do a full restoration because I wanted to keep its original charm. I replaced a few nails in the underside, tightened some screws, and cleaned the upholstery with a mild solution. That's when I heard the first subtle sound, a soft sigh. At first, I thought it was just the building settling or maybe a neighbor's radio through the walls. I stood still, holding the damp rag in my hand. waiting to hear it again. Nothing. I shrugged and went back to work, but I couldn't shake a strange feeling. There was no wind in the room, no open windows, nothing that would explain that low sound. That night I decided to move the chair from the workshop to my living room. I just felt like it belonged in the house. I placed it near a small table by the window. I sat down in it for a moment. The seat felt sturdy, but there was a slight give, as if the springs underneath were old and worn. The fabric was scratchy against my arms. I leaned back and tested the backrest. It creaked softly. I closed my eyes for a few seconds and I thought I heard another sigh. My eyes snapped open. My body tensed, but I saw nothing unusual. I touched the side of my neck, noticing my pulse was faster than normal. I went to bed that night feeling a bit uneasy, but I told myself it was just my imagination. I had a full day of work in the morning, so I forced myself to sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a small thump in the living room. My heart thudded in my chest. I froze in bed for a moment, listening. The house was quiet. Then I heard a slow, soft creak. My mouth felt dry. I didn't want to get up, but the curiosity and a slight rush of adrenaline pushed me to check. I left my bedroom without turning on the overhead light, only using a small flashlight I keep in the nightstand. The hallway felt colder than usual. I reached the living room door and peered in. The chair was there, still in the same spot. The beam of light from my flashlight showed the upholstery. Nothing moved, but I noticed the cushion looked slightly compressed, as though someone was sitting on it. I stared at that indentation for a few seconds, waiting for my eyes to adjust. My pulse pounded in my ears. I approached the chair, shining the flashlight around. The seat looked empty. I leaned forward and pressed my hand onto the cushion. The indentation smoothed out like normal. I stood there, breathing through my mouth, trying to stay calm. I told myself that maybe the springs were settling because it was an older piece. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that depressed seat. I went back to bed, but my sleep was fitful. The next morning, I woke up groggy and frustrated. I made coffee, glanced at the chair, and decided to ignore any weird sounds or impressions. I told myself I was being paranoid. I had a busy day with clients and I wanted to stay focused. But around noon, when I stopped by the house to grab some paperwork, I paused in the living room again. The sun was shining through the window, hitting that old upholstery. Everything looked normal. I moved closer, checking the seat, the arms, and the back. Nothing was odd in the daylight. No weird smell, no suspicious creaking. I felt a little silly, to be honest. That night, though, it happened again. I was reading a book in my bedroom when I heard a distinct sigh. It wasn't loud, but it was too clear to ignore. It came from the living room. My heart kicked into overdrive. I placed my book face down on the bed and listened. Then there was a light series of creaks as if the chair was being used. I stood up, turned on the overhead light in my room, and walked down the hallway. I didn't bother with stealth this time. I wanted to see what was happening right away. When I reached the living room, I flicked on the light switch. The chair was in plain view. For a split second, I thought I saw a faint pressure on the seat, but it vanished almost instantly. I'm not a superstitious person, but my chest tightened. I felt a cool sweat on my forehead. My mouth tasted bitter. I stayed there for a full minute, staring at the chair. Nothing else happened. I walked over to it, placed my hand on the seat. It was warm, as if someone had just been sitting. That realization made my scalp prickle. I started questioning my own senses. Was I working too many hours and hallucinating from exhaustion? I rubbed my eyes, took a few slow breaths, and said aloud, "It's just an old chair." My voice sounded shaky. I headed back to bed, but I barely slept. I kept expecting more noises. I tossed and turned until morning. Over the next week, these events became more frequent. At random times, usually late at night, I would hear soft sighs from the living room. Sometimes I'd hear small creaks like shifting weight. Each time I rushed to check, I'd find the cushion depressed. The arms of the chair would squeak as if they had just been pressed. One time I thought I saw the backrest tilt forward a bit, like a person was getting up. But when I flipped on the lights, it was still. My heart rate would spike and my stomach would twist. My hands would shake, and I'd feel a dull ache in my temples. During the day, I tried to occupy myself with other work, focusing on refinishing a set of antique cabinets. But I caught myself glancing at the living room door every time I passed by. My mind raced with questions. I started checking the chair for hidden mechanisms, loose parts, anything that might cause these movements or sounds. I unzipped parts of the upholstery, examined the frame, tested the springs. Everything looked normal for a piece of its age, but that didn't explain the sighing sounds. One evening, I decided to stay in the living room after dinner. I turned on the TV but left the volume low. I sat on the sofa, facing the armchair, and sipped a beer. I wanted to see if anything happened when I was there. For an hour, the room was quiet, except for the quiet chatter from the TV. Then, around 10 o'clock, I heard a gentle sigh right next to the chair. I jerked forward, my eyes locked on the cushion. It started to compress inward, the fabric tightening as though bearing weight. My heart hammered. I couldn't think. I froze, gripping the beer bottle so tight I thought it would shatter. The cushion sank deeper, and the arms of the chair gave a slow squeak. I jumped to my feet, breathing heavily. The chair's backrest shifted with a slight creak, as though a person was leaning back. I felt a chill across my arms. My scalp tingled. I stepped closer, maybe 2 feet away, and I could see the distinct shape of a body's outline in the seat. Then, just as quickly, it disappeared. The cushion rose back to normal. My breathing was ragged. I could smell my own sweat. The moment passed, and the chair looked normal again. I remember standing there staring at that chair, my muscles feeling tense and shaky. I debated throwing it out, but part of me was fixated on understanding what was happening. I grabbed the chair by its arms and pulled it toward the center of the room. I ran my hands over the wood, feeling for hidden switches. I pressed down on the seat. It felt solid. I lifted the cushion, checked underneath again, and found nothing but old springs and new nails from my earlier repairs. That night, I slept with my bedroom door locked. I didn't know what else to do. I kept imagining footsteps in the hallway or the sound of faint breathing. My chest felt tight, and my throat was dry all night. The next morning, I drank 2 cups of coffee just to feel normal. I tried to distract myself by calling a couple of clients and scheduling some repairs. I avoided looking at the living room. I wasn't sure if I wanted to face that strange phenomenon again, but later that evening, I couldn't help myself. I needed answers. I set up my phone to record video. I placed it on a small shelf, pointed at the chair. I turned off all the lights except a single lamp in the corner. Then I sat on the sofa and waited. After about an hour, I felt an odd pressure in the air. It was subtle, but it made the hairs on my arms stand up. My skin felt clammy. Then I heard the sigh. My eyes locked on the phone screen, but it was a small image from across the room. I looked directly at the chair instead. The cushion pushed down again. The wood on the arms creaked. I couldn't breathe for a moment. Then I heard something else. A whisper or a faint murmur. It didn't have distinct words, but it was definitely a human-like sound. I swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. My chest felt ready to burst. I watched as the seat pressed in further, like someone shifting their weight. The backrest gave a soft groan. I reached for my phone, trying to keep my hand steady. I stepped closer, filming the chair. The cushion was visibly pushed down. It was terrifying and fascinating at the same time. My mouth went dry and my heart thudded, and then I heard the whisper. I felt a sudden impulse to pull away. For a few seconds, I just stared my gear. The cushion slowly rose back. The arms of the chair stopped creaking, and then the presence seemed to fade. I ended the audio captured a low, airy sound. It wasn't just in my head. I decided I couldn't keep this thing in my house anymore. I was overwhelmed by the nightly interruptions and the feeling that something was always just there, watching or sitting. I dragged the chair back into my workshop. I left it in the corner. I locked the door and stayed out for a day. When I finally returned, I tried to convince myself I could fix this. I considered removing the upholstery entirely, redoing the frame. Maybe if I changed the fabric, this would stop. But as soon as I approached it, a sense of unease filled the workshop. My throat went tight. I could smell that faint perfume-like odor again. I felt a slight vibration in the floorboards, or maybe it was in my legs. I tried to start the restoration. I removed a couple of staples from the underside, but I couldn't continue. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I thought about selling it, but then I imagined unloading this onto someone else. I wasn't sure I wanted to pass this problem along. For the first time in my career, I felt afraid to work on a piece of furniture. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing those sighs in my head, even though the chair was in the workshop. The next morning, I forced myself to go into the workshop with a clear plan. I was going to dismantle the entire frame and see if something was hidden inside. As soon as I touched the seat, though, I heard the whisper. My chest tightened and my arms felt weak. I couldn't do it. I backed away, breathing fast. I realized I needed to get rid of it in some way, but I didn't know how to proceed. I still haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do. The chair is in the workshop, covered by an old sheet. Sometimes I hear a muted sigh from behind the door. Sometimes at night, I think I hear a faint creak. My pulse races, and I break into a sweat. I try to ignore it. I try to convince myself it's just in my head. But I know it's real because I've seen the cushion depress with my own eyes. I feel stuck, torn between my usual approach of fixing old furniture and this odd sense that I'm dealing with something beyond my experience. I can't just leave it on the curb. I can't burn it. I can't sell it to someone else without explaining what's going on. So, for now, it stays in my workshop. I keep the door locked. I try to focus on other projects, but I can't pretend that this armchair isn't affecting me. My stomach gets queasy whenever I think about it. My shoulders tense up when I walk by the workshop. That's the story so far. I never thought I'd be afraid of a piece of furniture, but here I am, dealing with sighs, creaks, and whispered sounds. It's turned my nights into a series of anxious moments, checking over my shoulder and listening for noises. Every night I wonder if I'll hear it again. And every time I think about walking into that workshop, my heart starts pounding. I don't know what's sitting there or why it chose to show itself in that chair. All I know is that it feels real, and it won't leave me alone. I first heard that voice when I was 30 feet underwater in a pitch-black lake. I still remember the tight grip of my wetsuit around my arms and the slow, rhythmic sound of my own breathing through the regulator. I was out there to explore a hidden cave system that I'd heard about from old rumors. But I wasn't ready for what actually happened. I'm going to lay it out exactly as I experienced it, without dressing it up. I arrived at the lake the previous day around sunset. The location was far from any major road. It was down a muddy track surrounded by dense trees with no cabins or buildings in sight. There was a small clearing where I could park my SUV. I noticed right away how quiet it was. No birds, no wind, no rustling branches. The lake looked calm, just a wide stretch of dark water with trees on every side. I set up camp near the edge, maybe 10 feet from the waterline. My gear was packed in a few large plastic bins, extra tanks, regulators, lights, a dry bag with my electronics. I checked everything thoroughly. I never risk diving at night with faulty equipment. I eat a quick dinner of instant noodles, watch the sky fade to a deep blue, and wait for darkness. Around 10 p.m., I start preparing for my first dive. I want to see if there's any sign of those rumored caves. I get into my wetsuit, strap on my buoyancy compensator, secure my tank, test my primary and backup lights, and wade into the water. It's colder than I expected. I feel a chill creeping past the neck seal of my suit, making the small hairs on my arms stand on end. I lower my mask, bite down on the regulator mouthpiece, and sink beneath the surface. At first, it's silent except for the hiss of air. I'm used to the darkness, but this lake is especially murky. My flashlight reveals only a narrow beam in front of me. Visibility is maybe 5 feet. I can see small fish scattering, Rocks pass by under my fins. My depth gauge shows 20 feet, then 30. The water is getting colder with each foot. There's a slight pressure on my ears. I equalize every few feet. Everything seems routine until I hear something that stops me cold. It's a human voice, a soft murmur, coming right through the water. At first, it's faint. I stop swimming and hover in place, shining my flashlight around. I check the sound from my regulator. Maybe there's a leak. Nothing. My ears are fine. I look over my shoulder, half expecting another diver. But I'm alone down here. I decide to push on. Maybe it was just my imagination. But then I hear it again. It's clearer now. It sounds like someone whispering my name. Eric. It's not possible. I can't hear normal speech underwater. My heart starts pounding. My breathing speeds up. I see my exhaled bubbles rising in front of my mask. The voice sounds like it's coming from deeper down, outside the range of my flashlight. I feel a sudden spike of adrenaline. My mind races. Should I go up? Should I keep going? For a few seconds, I do nothing. My hands tremble. My light beam shakes on the rocks in front of me. My gut tells me to return to the surface, but my curiosity wins out. I slowly continue descending, shining my flashlight below me, scanning the lake floor. At around 35 feet, I see a small opening in the rocks. It's not huge, but it looks like an entrance to a passage. I approach carefully, noticing the silt drifting in the water around me. The voice is steady now, like it's guiding me toward that opening. There's no other explanation for how I'm hearing it. It's impossible, but it's happening. I peer into the opening and see darkness. My flashlight barely illuminates the first few feet. My instincts scream caution. There's no reason to enter an unknown passage alone during a night dive. This is exactly how accidents happen. But the voice is calm, almost welcoming. I feel drawn in. I move closer, shining the light inside. The passage slopes downward and curves out of sight. I hover there for a moment, weighing my options. My air gauge shows I have enough for a short exploration, but not enough for a deep push. I take one more look, then back away. I decide to save it for another time in daylight with more tanks. On the ascent, I can't shake the feeling that something just called out to me. My breathing is fast, my heartbeat is loud, and I feel sweat trickling down my forehead despite the cold water. When I surface, I rip off my mask and gasp. The night sky is overcast. There's a heaviness in the air. My arms feel shaky. I swim to shore, pull off my fins, and step onto the muddy bank. I stand there for a minute, dripping water, looking at the lake. It's completely still. No ripples, no movement. I hear a faint ringing in my ears. I walk back to my campsite and take off my gear. The whole time I'm listening for any sound from the water. Nothing. I'm alone. I hang my wetsuit over a folding chair to dry, then collapse into my small tent. My mind is racing. Did I hallucinate? Did I get narked? But at 30 feet, that's unlikely. Maybe there's a weird underwater current that produced some noise. I can't explain it logically. My pulse is still high. I can't sleep. Every time I start to drift off, I hear that voice in my head whispering my name. In the morning, I feel a bit calmer. The sun's out, shining across the lake, but the place still feels deserted. I walk around the shore looking for any sign of other divers. I see nothing. I check a few rock outcrops. I scan the water for any unusual spots. Everything looks normal in daylight. The water is dark green, reflecting the tall trees around it. I eat a quick breakfast, then decide to do a shallow daytime dive to see if the passage is real. I want to map its location with my GPS. I gear up again, slip into the water, and descend slowly. The sunlight helps with visibility, but it's still murky. I find the same rocky area. I spot a small crack that leads to the hole I found last night. I check my compass and note the depth. I shine my light inside, but I don't hear any voice. Everything is silent except for my regulator. I don't go in, I just mark the spot. Then I surface, feeling more confused. I can't forget how clear that voice was. Yet now, in broad daylight, there's nothing. Back at shore, I look at my dive computer. Everything is normal. I sit by my tent for hours, cleaning my gear. At some point, I realize I'm tired but not sleepy. My mind is on edge. I keep thinking about going back at night. It's not rational, but I have this urge like I need to know if it will happen again. Night falls. The temperature drops. The air feels heavier than the night before. The moon is a narrow sliver in the sky. Around 9 p.m., I convince myself to try a second night dive. I can't leave without exploring that passage. I'm more cautious this time. I attach a second tank on my back for safety. I bring extra lights. I double-check my regulator. I set a reel line in case I go in. I enter the water. It's as cold as before. Maybe colder. I can feel the pressure in my ears sooner. I descend, scanning around. The lake floor is quiet. No fish stirring. My flashlight reveals floating particles and bits of plants drifting. A few minutes pass and the voice starts again. This time it's louder, almost like it's next to me. It says my name, then goes silent, then repeats it. My entire body tenses. I clench my teeth around the regulator mouthpiece. My breathing becomes rapid. The voice doesn't fade, though. It keeps calling me. It urges me deeper. I reach the opening. My beams of light show the rocky edges. I see silt swirling from a mild current inside. The voice sounds insistent, like it wants me to go through. My fingers feel numb. My heart thuds against my chest. I unclip the line reel from my harness and tie it to a rock near the entrance. I feed the line into the passage as I move inside. The darkness swallows me. The walls are narrow, maybe 4 feet across at most. I have to be careful not to stir up too much silt. The voice is repeating words I can't fully understand, but I sense it wants me to keep going. I pass a few bends, feeling the stone brushing my shoulders. I can see small pockets in the walls. The water is cold enough to make my face ache. My depth gauge shows 40 feet. My ears pop again. The passage continues, but I'm feeling uneasy. My gut is in knots. I decide to turn around. I pull on the line to guide me back. The voice grows louder, like it's protesting. My hands shake so much I almost drop my reel. I try to ignore it. My lights flicker for a second. A jolt of panic stabs through my chest. Then the lights come back. I see the exit, that faint beam from outside. I rush out into open water. The voice doesn't stop. It stays with me as I ascend. My ears are ringing. My head feels heavy. When I break the surface, I yank out my regulator and suck in a huge gasp of air. My entire body is trembling. I can still hear the voice, but it's faint now. It's inside my head, repeating my name. I swim to shore. My body aches from tension. I haul myself onto the muddy bank, struggle to my feet, and place my gear on the ground. The water drips off my suit. The night is quiet again, but I keep hearing that sound in my head. I stand there for a minute, breathing hard, trying to calm down. I look at the lake and I see a strange shimmer on the surface. It's near the center, maybe 50 yards out. It looks like a reflection of the moon, but the shape is off. It's distorted, and it flickers. I feel a surge of fear in my stomach. I decide to check it. I can't help myself. I walk around the edge of the lake until I reach a point where the distortion is closer. I have a small flashlight in my hand. When I shine it on the water, I see my own reflection, but it's twisted. My face looks stretched, like a funhouse mirror. My eyes seem larger. My mouth is twisted. Then the surface ripples and it looks like a hand pushing upward from below. There's no actual physical hand, but the water bulges toward me, as if something is pulling at the reflection from beneath. My chest tightens, and I stumble back a step. My flashlight shakes in my hand. I don't see any actual figure in the water, but the distortion in the reflection is clear. It shifts, like someone dragging a finger across a perfect mirror, warping the image of my face. No one touches me, but I feel a tug in my gut. My scalp pricks. My knees feel weak. My first instinct is to run back to my camp, but I force myself to stand still for a second, trying to see if there's a logical explanation. There's none. The voice in my head says, Come. It's the same voice I heard underwater. My breathing is shallow, my pulse races, I can't stay here. I back away, keeping my eyes on that water. The distortion lingers, then slowly smooths out. I hurry around the lake's edge to my campsite. I'm panting by the time I reach the tent. I toss my flashlight on the ground and strip off my gear. My wetsuit is soaked, and my hands are shaking so badly I can't undo the zipper for a moment. I finally peel it off. Then I stand there in just a thermal layer still cold. My feet feel numb against the damp ground. My mind is buzzing with adrenaline. I sit on a folding chair and try to breathe slowly. The voice is still there, faint and persistent, but it's not as strong. I wonder if I should pack up and drive out of here right now, even if it's the middle of the night. But the trail is rough, and I'm not sure I can keep my focus. I decide to stay until morning. All night, I hear little whispers. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see that distorted reflection. My muscles are sore from clenching. My stomach churns. The hours crawl by. At first light, I exit the tent. The lake looks normal under the early sun. The water is still, quiet, almost peaceful. But I don't buy it. I start packing up my campsite. I jam my gear into the bins, not caring about order. I just want to leave. Before I finish, I glance at the lake one last time. I see no movement. The water is calm. I realize my heart is still hammering. I can't get the voice out of my mind. Maybe I'll come back with a team. Maybe I won't. But right now, I just want to get away from here. I load everything into my SUV and climb in. As I start the engine, I feel a slight pressure in my head, like a lingering echo. I back out of the clearing and drive down the muddy path toward the main road. When I reach the highway, the voice fades to a faint memory, but I can still recall every detail of how it sounded underwater. I can't explain this. I don't have a theory about telepathy or spirits. I just know I heard that voice, and I saw my reflection warp like it was being yanked from below. I feel a knot in my stomach as I think about that hidden passage I left unexplored. I can't stop imagining what's in there. Yet I'm glad I made it out. My nerves are fried. My hands are still shaky on the wheel. I guess I'm done diving that place alone. That's the whole story. I wish I could wrap it up with some neat explanation, but I don't have one. All I have are these memories, a sense of unease, and a voice in my head that still echoes every now and then, even though I'm nowhere near that dark lake. I still remember the first moment I stepped into that old chapel. I walked through the crooked doorway and my flashlight revealed dust dancing in the air. The smell of damp stone and rotting wood hit me right away. I'm a religious tourism guide, and I've seen plenty of abandoned sites. I've had my share of strange moments in old monasteries, silent cloisters, and shuttered sanctuaries, but nothing ever prepared me for what I experienced inside that place. I decided to spend a night there because I wanted to get a feel for its layout. I wanted to see if it was worth including in a tour program. It had a unique architectural style, at least from what I could tell, and it gave off an unsettling vibe the moment I entered. There was no caretaker, no official record of restoration, and the structure looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The front door was gone, so I just walked in. The interior was dark, but some moonlight came through the stained glass windows. I was drawn to those windows because they seemed slightly brighter than I expected. They had images of saints and biblical scenes, but they looked worn. I had a small backpack with a sleeping bag, some snacks, and a few supplies. I had my flashlight, extra batteries, and a small portable lantern. I wasn't worried about wild animals or criminals because the place was remote and the area was known to be quiet. No one lived nearby. When I first set up my sleeping bag near the front pews, I felt a strange pulse in the atmosphere. It was a physical sensation in my chest, like a slight pressure against my ribs. I ignored it. I checked the old altar and the dusty chairs. Everything smelled moldy. The floor creaked under every step and the walls were stained with watermarks. In one corner, I saw an old confessional booth with its curtain half torn. I ran my hand across its wooden surface. The texture felt rough and damp. My flashlight beam kept flickering whenever I aimed it toward the ceiling. I thought it might be an issue with the batteries, so I switched to my lantern. As I walked around, I started to hear faint sounds. It was like soft singing or chanting, very low, barely audible. I thought maybe I was hearing wind moving through cracks in the walls. I tried to locate the source of the noise, but I couldn't. I even went outside for a moment to see if the wind was blowing, but the night was still with only a faint breeze. When I walked back in, the chanting stopped. I felt a chill on my arms, and I noticed goosebumps. I tried to dismiss it and continued my inspection of the architecture. The columns looked sturdy, and the arches were elaborate in a plain sort of way. There was a distinct style that made me think of a transitional period between Gothic and something else. I knelt down near the altar and checked the cracks in the floor. I tapped the stone with my knuckles to see if there was any hollow space beneath. While I was doing that, I sensed movement above me. I froze and looked up. My lantern didn't reach the high ceiling very well, but I could see something shifting up there. It seemed like a faint shape drifting across the vaulted ceiling. I kept staring, trying to see if it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. After a few seconds, it vanished. I stood up, feeling my heart beat a little faster. I told myself it was just a bat or a bird, but there was no fluttering sound, no sign of an animal. I turned around, scanning the pews, making sure I wasn't missing anything. The chanting started again, very soft, like it was coming from behind the walls. It only lasted a moment, then it faded. I glanced at my watch. It was about 11 p.m. I decided to set up my lantern and sit down for a snack. I opened a small bag of chips and tried to relax, but my stomach felt tense. The air felt thick and I was sweating a bit even though it wasn't hot. After a few minutes, I noticed a faint glow coming from the stained glass windows on the left side of the chapel. I walked over to them, shining my lantern close to the glass. The colored pieces seemed to emit a slight glow, but there was no outside light bright enough to cause that. The moon was behind the chapel, so it wasn't shining directly through those windows. I looked around for any reflective surfaces or lights. I found nothing. I kept my face close to the glass, and I saw faint swirling patterns in the colored panels. It looked like the glass was moving, but when I placed my hand on the surface, it was solid. The chanting started again, a bit louder now, or maybe I was just paying more attention. I decided to call it a night. I turned off my lantern to save power and I relied on my flashlight. I checked the main entrance again to be sure nothing was blocking my escape. The heavy wooden doors that once sealed the chapel were gone, replaced by open space. Outside was a patch of tall grass and a cluster of trees. I heard some insects buzzing outside, and that comforted me a little because it was a normal sound. I went back in, zipped myself into my sleeping bag, and tried to rest. My plan was to wake up early, take some more notes, and leave by sunrise. My eyes closed for a while, but I couldn't drift into a real sleep. Something kept me on edge. I heard a scraping sound near the altar, like wood against stone. I tried to ignore it, but my body tensed up. My breathing got shallow. I felt my hands clenching inside the sleeping bag. I told myself that old buildings make all kinds of noises. Sometimes wood expands. Sometimes the wind causes vibrations. I tried to calm down. Then the chanting resumed. It was clearer now, like multiple voices in unison. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and looked around. The chapel was dark, but the stained glass windows had that faint glow again, enough to show me the outlines of the pews and columns. I aimed my flashlight at the altar. There was nothing there except dust and cobwebs. Then I noticed faint shapes on the ceiling. They looked like shadows swaying back and forth, completely detached from anything on the floor. I turned off my flashlight to see if there was any external light causing them. The shadows remained, and they seemed to move in slow patterns across the stone ceiling. My pulse throbbed in my neck. I felt sweat dripping down my back. The chanting grew louder for a moment, then stopped again. The shadows flickered as if they were reacting to the chanting. I got out of my sleeping bag and stood in the aisle. My legs felt shaky. I looked up again, trying to see if there was a hole or some reflection creating these shapes. I saw nothing except those dark forms twisting and overlapping. The windows kept that faint glow, and it looked stronger now, like it pulsed in time with the shapes on the ceiling. I stepped toward the altar, feeling a rush of cold air around my ankles. My heart was pounding. The silence that followed the chanting made my ears ring. I tried to focus on the immediate details: the scent of damp stone, the scrape of my shoes on the dusty floor, my own heartbeat. I didn't want to think beyond that. I moved carefully toward the steps leading up to the altar, and then to the choir loft. The staircase was on the left side, a small spiral set of steps that led up to the old choir area above the entrance. I wanted to see if I could catch a better view of the ceiling from up there. I also wanted to understand the cause of these shadows. Part of me hoped I would find a simple explanation, maybe holes in the roof letting in moonlight. But I knew the moon wasn't bright enough for that. As I climbed, each step creaked and the metal railing felt cold and slightly sticky. I had my flashlight in one hand, shining it ahead of me. The space got tighter as I went up. The chanting started again, louder now. It was definitely coming from inside the chapel, but it had that strange echo, like it passed through solid walls. I breathed through my mouth, trying to keep my composure. My head felt light, like I wasn't getting enough air. I forced myself to keep going up. When I reached the small platform of the choir loft, I stopped. I looked down at the pews. My lantern was still next to my sleeping bag, casting a weak glow in that corner. The rest of the chapel was dark, except for the windows that still had that strange luminescence. The swirling shadows on the ceiling were clearer from this angle. They moved in a slow dance, merging and separating. My stomach churned. I heard my own heartbeat and my vision blurred for a moment. Then the chanting reached a high note and it vibrated in my ears. I turned around to look at the stained glass windows from above. They looked brighter now, almost like they had a soft fire inside them. The colors were more vivid, and I could see streaks of light moving behind the glass. My flashlight began to flicker again. I banged it against the palm of my hand. The chanting paused. I heard a long, low rumble like distant thunder, but it seemed to come from under my feet. The floor of the choir loft trembled. Dust fell from the beams overhead. The shapes on the ceiling gathered in one spot near the center vault. My hands were shaking and my throat felt tight. I aimed my flashlight upward. The shadows collected into a rough silhouette. It looked like a tall figure with extended arms, or maybe wings. I couldn't see any detail, just a dark outline against the stone. My chest felt heavy, and I realized I was holding my breath. Then the stained glass windows flared with more intensity. The light from them glowed so strongly that it illuminated the entire chapel. The silhouette on the ceiling appeared to stare right at me, even though it had no visible eyes. I felt a jolt in my stomach, like a burst of adrenaline. My forehead broke out in sweat. My fingers felt numb against the flashlight. The chanting started again, this time directly behind me. I spun around. There was no one there. The sound was so close that I expected to see a group of people. Instead, I saw only the stone wall of the loft, broken chairs, and a small opening where the organ pipes used to be. I felt my knees weaken. My mouth went dry. I took a step backward. The silhouette on the ceiling expanded like it was growing larger, its edges spreading along the vault. The glow from the windows increased to a point that made my eyes hurt. I squinted, shielding my face with my free hand. I heard a loud snap like a wooden board splitting, and the silhouette shot across the ceiling, moving toward the choir loft. My chest tightened, and I stumbled back, pressing myself against the railing. A wave of cold air hit my face, and I smelled something like old incense mixed with damp. The chanting rose to a sharp climax, echoing off every wall. My teeth started chattering and my arms felt locked in place. I tried to move, but my legs refused to cooperate for a few seconds. Finally, I managed to turn toward the stairs. I descended as fast as I could without falling. My flashlight flickered and died halfway down, and I almost slipped. I grabbed the railing, scraping my arm on a piece of rusty metal. I felt the sting on my skin, but I kept going. The chanting followed me, not fading. and the shadows on the ceiling seemed to chase my peripheral vision. I reached the ground floor, tossed my flashlight aside, and ran to my lantern and backpack. I fumbled with the lantern switch, nearly dropping it. When it turned on, it flickered a bit but stayed lit. The chapel was brighter now because of the stained glass. That glow pulsed in waves, making the columns cast moving shadows across the floor. I looked up and saw the silhouette near the choir loft edge, hovering like it was watching me. I grabbed my sleeping bag and stuffed it in my backpack without caring about order. My mind was locked on leaving. The moment I turned toward the open doorway, I noticed a final surge of brightness from the windows. The entire chapel flashed with red, green, and blue light. My eyes stung, and for a second I couldn't see. I heard the chanting explode into one loud chord, then cut off. Everything went dark. My sight returned after a few heartbeats. I could still see the faint glow from the windows, but it was weaker now. The silhouette was gone. The chanting stopped. All that remained was a low hum that faded within a few seconds. I didn't hesitate. I stepped outside and felt the cool night air on my face. My heart still pounded, and my body felt shaky. I looked back at the chapel. The stained glass windows were barely visible in the moonlight. There were no lights inside, no chanting, no shadows on the ceiling. It looked like any other old building at night. But I knew what I experienced. My clothes were damp with sweat, my arm burned from the scrape, and my chest felt tight. I walked away from the entrance, crossed the tall grass, and found the small dirt path leading back to my car. My head was spinning. I didn't want to look over my shoulder, but I did once. I saw the dark shape of the chapel, silent and motionless. The sense of pressure in my chest started to fade with each step I took away from it. By the time I reached my car, I felt a little calmer, but my hands trembled as I searched for my keys. I still guide tours in religious sites. I haven't told many people about that night. I'm not sure how to explain it without sounding unstable. I kept telling myself there had to be a rational reason for everything I saw and heard, but nothing else has ever felt that intense. I haven't gone back to that chapel, and I don't plan to put it on any tour. I'm not interested in leading people into a place where the air hums with strange energy, where shapes move on the ceiling with no source of light, and where echoes of lost chants press against your ears. Every detail from that night stayed with me. The glow of the stained glass, the chilling presence on the ceiling, and the way my flashlight died at the worst times. Whenever I close my eyes, I see that silhouette hanging above me. I remember the chanting that seemed to come from behind the walls growing louder in the dark. The memory is enough to make my throat tighten and my palms sweat. I've never felt so certain that there are places we shouldn't explore alone. That chapel remains a mystery to me, and I'm not going to unravel it any further. I heard the clattering of plates on my first night in the old farmhouse. It wasn't a soft noise. It was sharp and clear. It pulled me out of a half-sleep. I sat up, listened again, and felt my heart pound. I wasn't sure if I was still dreaming. Then I heard it again, this time more distinct. It sounded like someone placing silverware on a table. I had locked all the doors. I had turned off every light. I was alone. Or at least I should have been alone. I rented this place because I needed time to experiment with recipes without distractions. I'm a chef by trade, and I travel a lot for events, festivals, and private dinners. After too many months of noise and stress, I just wanted to focus on cooking in a quiet setting. The property manager promised me that this farmhouse was away from everything. No neighbors within a mile, no traffic on the dirt roads. I brought my own supplies, packed my tools, and came here with the intention of staying for a few weeks. I never expected strange company. On my second night, I tried to ignore the sounds. I heard faint rattling in the dining area. The floor creaked too. It felt like footsteps, but not heavy ones. Maybe it was the old wood expanding. I got out of bed and walked down the hall. The hallway was dark. The dining room was at the end. I paused before entering. I didn't have a weapon. I only had my phone, but there was barely any signal. When I stepped inside, the room was empty. The lights were off, yet I could make out the table and the faint glow from a small lamp in the corner. I noticed something strange. The table was perfectly set for one person, but I hadn't touched any plates that day. The cutlery was arranged in a neat line. A single napkin sat folded on the left side of the plate. I felt a chill run through my arms. I left the dining room in a hurry. I turned on every light, checked every door, and walked around outside, shining a flashlight through the bushes. Nobody was there. No tracks on the damp soil, no broken window. I came back inside, locked the doors again, and told myself it was some odd prank from the property manager. But the manager didn't have a reason to do that, and I didn't see any sign of forced entry. Over the next few days, I tried to stay calm. I spent my mornings in the kitchen, testing sauces and marinating different cuts of meat. I don't like to leave the stove unattended, so I made sure I kept my focus on the food. I forced myself not to think about the table, but every night I heard those subtle noises again. They sounded like delicate movements of silverware and plates. It wasn't violent. It was as if someone was gently shifting things around and then placing them down. I started to get jumpy. I would jerk my head toward the doorway, expecting to see a figure, but I saw nothing. One afternoon, I decided to check the dining area in daylight. There was nothing unusual about the table or chairs. No hidden compartments, nothing under the tablecloth. I felt a little stupid for searching, but I needed some explanation. I moved the chairs around, knocked on the walls, and even checked the chandelier. I found no trick wires or devices. Everything looked normal. I started losing sleep. I drank coffee to push through my days, but I felt tense all the time. My eyes burned from lack of rest. Sometimes I napped on the couch in the living room, hoping I wouldn't hear anything from the dining room at night. But that made no difference. The noises continued. I decided I needed physical proof of what was going on. I set up my phone on a tripod in the hallway, pointing it toward the dining room door. I hit record before going to bed. The next morning, the phone was still there. I checked the footage. For most of the video, the hallway was empty. The clock on my phone showed the hours passing. At around 2 in the morning, I saw the dining room light flick on by itself for a few seconds and then switch off. I heard the faint sound of plates clinking, but the camera showed no one entering or leaving. I just saw the open doorway and darkness inside. When I opened the dining room door that morning, I noticed a dirty plate on the table. There were streaks of sauce on it. It looked like someone had scraped the plate clean with a fork. A used napkin sat crumpled on the side. I felt a tightness in my stomach. I touched the plate. It was slightly warm. I didn't know how that was possible. The stove was cold. No one else was here. I took a step back and almost stumbled. My heart thumped so hard I could feel it in my neck. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I decided to start writing down every incident, plate appearances, strange sounds, empty glasses. I kept track of times and dates. On the 5th night, I woke up and discovered 2 glasses on the living room table. Both were empty. I hadn't used those glasses. I tasted the inside of one. It was water, nothing else. I guessed that whoever was moving around here preferred plain water or maybe just needed something to wash down the food. By the 2nd week, I realized that some of my prepared meals in the fridge were going missing. Not entirely gone, but it looked like someone had opened the containers, scooped out a portion, and closed them again. My leftover sauce from the night before had a spoon stuck inside, as if someone had tried it and left the spoon there. I checked the doors again and tested the locks. They all worked. The windows were shut. I started to think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was doing it in my sleep, but I had never been a sleepwalker before. One evening, I decided to stay up in the dining room, hidden in a corner with the lights off. I took a seat behind a small bookshelf near the entrance. I brought a flashlight and sat there quietly for hours. I heard nothing for a long time. I almost dozed off, but I stayed alert. Then, around midnight, I heard a sound in the kitchen. A soft clink, like someone picking up a pan. I stood up, tiptoed toward the door, and peeked around. The kitchen was dark, but I heard subtle movements. I couldn't see a figure, but I could see my frying pan shift slightly on the counter. It moved as if lifted, then placed back down, but there were no hands on it. My chest felt tight and I held my breath. I wanted to speak, but my throat tensed. Then I heard footsteps moving toward the dining room. The wooden floor creaked with each step, but I saw no one. I retreated behind the bookshelf again. The door to the dining room swung open and then closed by itself. I saw the doorknob turn. My scalp tingled. I stayed still, listening. Silverware clacked. A chair squeaked. I heard a fork scrape against a plate. It wasn't rushed. It sounded like regular eating, bite after bite. I tried to look around the corner, but I couldn't see anything. It was too dark. I waited there, heart pounding, until the sound stopped. Then the door opened again and I heard the floor creak away toward the kitchen. After that, silence. I turned on the lights and rushed into the dining room. The plate was half finished. Pieces of chicken remained. The fork was on the table, smeared with sauce. I felt my legs shaking. I grabbed the plate and tossed the food in the trash. I watched it slide into the garbage bag. I wasn't comfortable with the idea of something invisible eating in my house. I locked myself in my bedroom for the rest of the night. By the third week, I had trouble focusing on my recipes. I felt like I was living with an unseen guest who had no regard for my sense of security. One morning, I found a glass on the bathroom counter, half filled with water. The next day, I found another plate, this time in the hallway with crumbs on it. The presence was getting bolder, or I was just noticing it more. There was a storm coming on the last weekend of my stay. The sky turned gray in the morning. By afternoon, rain started falling and thunder rattled the windows. I decided to cook a full dinner that night, mostly out of spite. I thought that if something was here, I wanted to see what would happen if I presented a proper meal. I spent hours in the kitchen. I prepared a roast, mashed potatoes, and a light salad. I set the table myself around 7 in the evening. I placed a single seat at the table, right in the center. I lit 2 candles on either side of the plate. Then I turned off the overhead lights and stood in the corner behind a large wooden hutch. The only light came from the candles. The wind outside howled, and the rain pelted the windows. Thunder boomed in the distance. I waited, arms crossed, back pressed against the wall. After several minutes, I heard faint footsteps on the wooden floor. The dining room door opened by itself again. The door's hinges creaked. My stomach knotted. I gripped the hutch to steady my hands. The chair opposite the plate moved back as if someone was pulling it out. It made a scraping sound across the floor. Then it stopped, like someone had taken a seat. I heard the fork scrape across the plate. The roast shifted slightly and I saw the edge lift as if someone was cutting it. The mashed potatoes sank on one side, forming an indentation as if a spoon or fork pressed into them. My mouth went dry. I watched the silverware raise into the air with no hand holding it. It hung there for a second, then lowered to the plate. I saw the roast move again. Pieces fell away. Something was chewing it, I assumed, because I heard soft chewing noises. The candlelight flickered across an empty chair. Thunder rocked the house. The windows rattled. The fork tapped the plate again and again. I could hear quiet breathing, but it was so faint, I wondered if I imagined it. Then I heard a swallow, like someone gulping. I looked at the glass. It lifted a bit and tilted. Wine sloshed inside, then drained as if someone took a sip. I felt my pulse in my temples. My eyes watered from not blinking. The chair squeaked as if the person shifted their weight. My entire body felt cold and tense. I thought about running outside, but the storm was fierce. The roads would be mud. Lightning flashed, and for a split second I saw the reflection on the glass. It was just the glass floating in midair. Then darkness again. The wind howled through the gaps in the windows. I kept my eyes on the invisible diner. I wanted to speak, but I couldn't push any words out. My jaw felt locked. The meal continued for about 15 minutes. The roast disappeared piece by piece, leaving scraps of fat on the plate. The mashed potatoes showed more scoops. The salad wilted a bit from the dressing. At one point, the knife fell to the table with a clang. Then it lifted again. The sound of metal scraping against ceramic filled the room. It sounded normal, like any dinner. That normalcy felt more disturbing than anything else. Finally, the fork landed on the plate with a soft thud. The chair moved back, scraping the floor. I heard gentle footsteps move away. The door opened again, then shut. I didn't move for a long time. The candles flickered. The roast was gone, except for a few bits of cartilage. The salad bowl was nearly empty. The wine glass was half finished. I stood there, breathing heavily. My knees felt weak, my arms shook. The thunder kept rolling outside, and the rain kept falling. After a while, I summoned the courage to step out from behind the hutch. My heart was still beating fast, and my hands were clammy. I touched the plate. It was still warm. The glass smelled of red wine. I could see the lip of the glass coated in a slight residue, as if touched by an actual mouth. I didn't want to stay in that room any longer. I blew out the candles and made my way to the kitchen. That night, the storm lasted for hours. The power went out briefly, but it came back. I stayed in my bedroom with the door locked. I didn't hear any more sounds from the dining room, but I didn't sleep either. I kept thinking about that chair moving back on its own. I kept recalling the plate shifting. I remembered the slow and deliberate chewing sounds. When morning came, I found the dining room exactly as I left it. The plate, fork, and knife sat on the table, covered in dried gravy. The glass stood there with half the wine still inside. There were no new footprints or spills. Everything felt frozen in time, like a snapshot of the previous night. My mind still refused to process it. I packed my bags that same day. I didn't care that I had planned to stay longer. I was done with that place. I don't tell most people about this. When I do mention it, I keep it brief. I don't offer explanations or theories. I just say that something shared a meal with me, even though I never saw who or what it was. Sometimes late at night, I think about the sound of the knife scraping the plate, and I get a chill down my spine. I can still feel the heavy tension in my stomach. I still remember the way my ears rang after each scrape of the silverware. I haven't rented another farmhouse since then. I haven't tried to replicate that meal. Sometimes I wonder if that thing is still there, waiting for its next dinner. I try not to dwell on that. But it's hard to forget the sight of a chair moving on its own. It's hard to forget the quiet, invisible steps on old wooden floors. It's even harder to forget the half-eaten food left behind by something that no one could see. I'll be straight with you. When I first stepped into that house, I just wanted a fresh start. I'd been working at the bank for years, barely saving enough to rent a bigger place in the city. But I found this narrow old house on the outskirts, and the price seemed fine. I didn't expect weird noises or flickering lights. I expected some leaky pipes or bad wiring, maybe a draft through the windows. But I didn't expect to feel like I was walking into some kind of layered reality where my own reflection couldn't keep up. I didn't plan on second-guessing every step I took in that hallway. Yet that's exactly what happened. The place had a long and cramped corridor right in the center of the ground floor. It connected the front door to the back rooms. On the left side, there was a small sitting area, then a closet door, and on the right there were 3 doors in a row leading to a kitchen, a laundry room, and a tiny bathroom. That corridor was about 3 feet across, so I had to shuffle sideways if I tried carrying anything wider than a few inches. It felt claustrophobic, especially after sundown. The only light fixture up there was a single bulb in the middle. And right at the end of the corridor there was this mirror with a huge antique frame. It took up almost the entire wall, making the space seem even longer. I'll describe that mirror clearly. It had a heavy wooden frame with carvings around the edges. It looked chipped in a few places, and the paint was peeling. There were flower-shaped designs in each corner. The glass itself had little dark spots on it, like it was starting to lose some of the reflective backing. The first time I saw it, I didn't think much of it. It was old-fashioned and kind of grimy, but it was already fixed to the wall, so I left it alone. I just assumed it was part of the house's old charm. The day I moved in, I spent hours carrying boxes from the small moving truck through that narrow corridor. It was a pain. I kept bumping my elbows against the walls. By the end of the night, I was too tired to do much of anything. I just tossed a sleeping bag on the living room floor and collapsed. The corridor was dark and the mirror was out of sight around the corner, so I didn't spend any time thinking about it. Over the next few days, I unpacked my stuff. I'm not a hoarder, but I have enough belongings to fill the place. On the second morning, I noticed something weird when I walked past the mirror on my way to the kitchen. I caught a glimpse of my reflection, but it seemed slow. I stopped in my tracks, thinking maybe I was half asleep. I looked directly at the mirror and it looked normal. I lifted my right hand, and the reflection did the same thing right away. I shrugged it off and got my coffee. Later that same day, I walked by again. This time, as I passed, I thought I saw my reflection tilt its head about a second after I had already moved. I froze and took a step backward. I stared into the glass. My reflection stared back. It moved with me, in sync. So I told myself I must be imagining things. Maybe my eyes were tired or the overhead light was flickering. I had been stressed at work, so I figured my mind was playing tricks. By the end of that week, I had settled in. I had a small couch in the living room, a table in the kitchen, and my bed was set up upstairs. But every time I walked through that corridor, I felt this tense feeling in my stomach. I started hurrying past the mirror. I didn't like how narrow the space was. I didn't like the old smell, something like dust and stale air. And I especially didn't like glancing at that mirror. Sometimes, when I was in a rush, I'd catch a glimpse out of the corner of my eye, and my reflection seemed off. Just slightly. It was either a fraction slower or angled differently. One night I was coming home late from work. I was carrying my briefcase in one hand and a bag of takeout in the other. I stepped into the corridor, and the overhead light flickered. I took a step forward. My reflection took that step, but maybe half a second too late. I stopped so fast I nearly dropped my food. My heart hammered in my chest. I could feel my pulse in my neck. I stood there, staring. My reflection stood there too. This time it didn't feel like a small delay. It was as if I moved and then it moved. I thought I was losing it. I tried to calm down. I inched closer to the mirror and put my face almost against the glass. I breathed slowly. I felt warmth from my own breath bouncing back at me. My reflection's eyes matched mine. I touched the surface with my fingertips, and the reflection did the same at the exact same moment. It felt cold. I slowly backed away. I barely slept that night. I tried to read the news or watch TV, but my mind kept drifting to that image of my reflection hesitating. The next morning, I woke up feeling tired. I got ready for work and walked past the mirror without looking. But the shape of it in my peripheral vision gave me chills. It felt like something was waiting behind that glass. After a few more days, I started to notice differences in the reflected corridor itself. For example, my living room door is on the left side of the hallway when I approach from the front door, but in the reflection it seemed to be on the right. The doorknobs looked reversed. I found myself stopping to look carefully. I'd step to the side, peering into the reflection, comparing. The arrangement in the mirror felt swapped around. I even walked through the real corridor, double-checking each door's position. In real life, the kitchen door was in the middle of the right wall, while the laundry room was near the back. But in the reflection, the order seemed reversed. At first, I suspected the mirror was warped. Old mirrors can do that. But the more I stared, the more convinced I became that the corridor in the reflection was a slightly different version, as though it was a corridor from another place. It made my stomach tighten with anxiety. I tried to ignore it, but it kept bugging me every time I walked by. I started spending less time in the corridor. I rushed through it, trying not to look. One evening, I was standing in the living room, looking at some bills, when I heard a strange scraping noise from the corridor. It was like nails running across wood. I put down the papers and walked toward the sound. I flicked the corridor light on. The scraping stopped. I saw the mirror at the end. Nothing else. I walked up to it, my breath uneven. I could smell the old wood frame. I could see dust motes in the air under the light. Then I heard a faint squeaking sound behind the glass. It was quick and stopped as soon as I leaned closer. I touched the frame. It felt rough, with bits of peeling paint falling under my fingers. I slowly pressed my ear to it. I didn't hear anything. I took a step back and looked straight into the mirror. The reflection was there, but the corridor behind me and the reflection seemed off. The doors looked crooked, like their angles weren't lining up. I realized my own figure in the reflection was standing at a slightly different angle too. I reached my hand toward the glass. The reflection reached at the same time. No delay. But I felt like I was being watched. I felt tiny hairs on my neck stand up. I hurried back to the living room and shut the corridor door. I wanted to pretend the mirror didn't exist. That night I had trouble sleeping again. I kept hearing that scraping sound in my head. I felt trapped in my own house. I kept thinking about how narrow the hallway was, and how that mirror was stuck at the end like a barrier I had to cross every day. For a couple of days, nothing strange happened. I began to relax, thinking maybe it was just my nerves. I tried to focus on work. I even stayed late at the bank, organizing some files just so I wouldn't have to go home early. But one night I got home around 9. The corridor was dark, so I flipped the switch. The bulb flickered, then stayed on. I glanced at the mirror. My reflection was there, but it looked dim because the light was behind me. I walked forward and stopped about 3 feet from the glass. That's when I saw movement inside the reflection that didn't match my own. The corridor in the mirror looked slightly distorted, but I could see something shifting in the dimness there, like a shape passing by. I tried to focus, my heart was pounding. I felt sweat forming on my hands. Then the shape moved into view. It was a hand, pale and thin, sliding into the frame from the left side inside the mirror. My reflection was standing still, matching my posture, but there was this separate hand creeping along the edge of the reflected corridor. My chest tightened. I felt my knees almost give out. I watched the hand in the mirror wrap its fingers around the frame from the inside. I tried to breathe, but it felt like I could barely get air. I took a slow step backward. My reflection stayed where it was. It didn't mirror my movement. It just stared out of the glass with this frozen look. I couldn't see any expression on its face, but I felt dread. Then the hand in the mirror pulled itself forward like someone was trying to climb out. I could see the wrist, then part of an arm. It was pale, with dark smudges. The glass rippled slightly, almost like water around the place where the arm emerged. My reflection remained in place, not moving at all. Its eyes were locked on me. I saw that arm extend further, reaching out toward the space where I stood. The fingers were long. I heard a faint wet sound like suction as it slid through the glass. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My mind was screaming at me to move. I felt my heart thudding in my ears. My mouth was so dry that I couldn't swallow. I took another step back and banged into the wall. The corridor was too narrow. My arms brushed the walls on both sides. I couldn't force my eyes away from that mirror. I saw more of the arm appear, then a shoulder, as if someone on the other side was hoisting themselves out. My reflection in the mirror had the same clothes I was wearing, but its eyes looked cold. Its face had no emotion. It stayed in a stiff position while this arm pushed forward through the glass. I started to move sideways along the wall. I considered running, but my legs felt locked. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely keep them steady. That pale arm reached out into the air on my side of the mirror. The hand opened and closed like it was testing the air. I heard a faint crackling sound, like knuckles popping. Then I snapped out of it. I jerked my body around and rushed back down the corridor, away from the mirror. My shoulders slammed into the corner of the wall. The pain shot down my arm, but I didn't stop. I threw open the door to the living room and turned on every light I could find. My chest felt tight. I stood in the middle of the living room, panting. I stared at the corridor door. It was still open. Nothing came through, but I thought I heard a scraping noise. It sounded like nails against the wooden frame. I forced myself to move. I grabbed a chair from the kitchen and wedged it under the corridor door handle. My heart was racing and my hands shook so badly I almost dropped the chair. I paced around, staring at the crack under the door. Nothing came out. I didn't see a shadow or hear any voices. It was dead quiet. Eventually, I reached for my phone and stood there debating if I should call the police. But what would I say? That a mirror was spitting out an arm? That my reflection was acting on its own? They'd think I was out of my mind. I decided to wait it out in the living room. I kept all the lights on. Hours passed. My eyes kept darting to the corridor door, half expecting it to burst open. But it stayed closed. Around dawn, I heard a soft clicking sound, almost like a light switch being toggled. I froze, but it stopped. I stayed perfectly still, listening. Finally, exhaustion took over. I dropped onto the couch and passed out for a couple of hours. When I woke up, it was morning, and sunlight was streaming in through the front windows. I felt a dull ache in my shoulder from where I'd slammed into the wall. I walked to the corridor door and leaned against it, listening. No sounds. I carefully removed the chair and turned the knob. The corridor was empty. The mirror was still there, but the glass looked normal. My reflection stood where it should, matching me. The arm and that frozen stare were gone. It almost felt like a bad dream, except my shoulder still hurt, and I had that memory seared into my mind. I'd love to tell you I found some simple explanation, but I didn't. I took a few days off work and hired someone to remove that mirror, but nobody wanted to touch it. I tried calling a local handyman, who offered to come by the following week. In the meantime, I avoided the corridor as much as possible. I used the back door to enter and exit the house. I even moved some furniture to block the corridor entrance from the living room. I decided I'd sleep in the living room until that mirror was gone. Every time I thought about it, I felt my chest tighten again, remembering that hand reaching out. I still heard the faint scraping in my head, even though the corridor was silent. There were moments when I stood in the living room at night, lights off, and I swore I saw the corridor light flicker under the gap of the door, but I stayed away. Eventually, I plan on getting that mirror hauled out and destroyed. I'm not sure how yet, but I'm not going near it myself. I just wanted a narrow house that fit my budget. I never wanted a corridor with a mirror that seemed to show another place, another arrangement, another version of me. For now, I keep the corridor closed off. I do my best to ignore it. I try to focus on my daily life, but I don't think I'll ever feel comfortable in this house again. And I can't shake the feeling that something behind that glass is still waiting, just beyond my reflection, looking for a way out. I started this job 5 nights ago and I haven't slept right since. The building is old, the corridors smell like damp paper, and the lights flicker whenever someone uses the appliances in the units. I'm the new maintenance guy, but people call me the night watchman because I'm the only one here from midnight until early morning. The moment I stepped into this place, I felt an uneasy tingle in the back of my neck. I brushed it off as nerves, but now I'm not so sure. There's something wrong with the elevators, and it's not just a mechanical problem. I feel it every time the doors open on their own in the middle of the night. I spend my nights walking the halls, checking for leaks, making sure no one's sneaking around or leaving trash. I carry a small flashlight, my ring of keys, and an outdated walkie-talkie the supervisor gave me. The building has 2 elevators, both installed decades ago. They rattle when they move, and sometimes the lights inside flicker. During the day, people complain that the ride is too rough, or that the doors take too long to open. They have no idea what it feels like at 3 in the morning. My first encounter with the elevator acting strange happened on my second shift. I was on the 9th floor checking a squeaking noise in the air vents. My flashlight battery was low, so I had a weak beam of light guiding my way. The hallway was empty, and I was alone with my thoughts. I heard the elevator ding behind me. I turned around, expecting to see someone step out. The doors opened, and no one was inside. The lights were flickering, though. It reminded me of a loose connection in the fixture. The elevator car stayed there with the doors wide open. It felt like an invitation, but I stayed in the hallway. Then I heard something that made my spine tighten. It was a voice whispering from inside, low and garbled. I couldn't make out the words, but I know what I heard. I rubbed my arms because my skin felt cold. I stepped closer to the doors and looked inside. The voice stopped. The lights stabilized. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, and I pressed the elevator call button on the wall, hoping it would reset. The doors slid shut. That was the beginning. I tried not to think too hard about it. I reported the flickering lights to the supervisor the next morning. She just wrote it down and said she'd have someone come in to fix it eventually. There's never enough money in the budget for maintenance in a place like this. I went about my duties the following night, but I kept feeling this nagging sense of unease whenever I walked by the elevators. On the third night, I was patrolling the basement to make sure the boiler wasn't acting up. The basement is cramped and smells like old pipes. It's just a cement space with a few locked storage rooms and a utility sink. I was about to climb back up the stairs when I heard the elevator ding again. It was around 2 a.m. Nobody should have been using it then. The doors opened down there in the basement, even though I hadn't pressed any call button. The interior light was dim, and the panel near the buttons looked odd. It had a faint glow, and I saw a ripple in the metal like it was vibrating. I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me, so I stepped closer. I heard a whisper that sounded like my name. It was so soft that I thought it might be coming from behind me, but I swiveled around and saw nobody else there. Then I saw a cluster of rust spots on the wall inside the elevator. They formed part of a word, but I couldn't read the full thing. My gut tightened, and I felt my cheeks warm up. I stepped back, letting the elevator doors close. Then the elevator took off on its own, heading up. I stared at the floor indicator above the doors. It stopped at the 7th floor, paused, then went to the 10th floor, and then it went all the way down to the 1st floor. It made no sense. By the 4th night, I was prepared with fresh batteries for my flashlight, and I tried to keep my phone in my pocket at all times. That night started normally. I did my rounds on each floor, flipping on lights in empty corridors, checking for leaks, and rattling doorknobs of vacant units. Around 1:30, I walked by the elevator bank on the 5th floor. The red indicator lights above the doors kept blinking, and the elevator in the middle was stuck between floors, at least according to the panel. I pressed the call button out of routine. The doors parted, revealing the dark interior. The overhead light flickered. I leaned in and saw new rust stains along the edges of the walls. They formed half-finished letters. Some looked like S, maybe an O. My flashlight flickered in my hand. My stomach knotted up. I took a slow breath. The air smelled metallic, like copper. I heard a faint hiss, then a whisper that rose from the panel. It sounded like my name again, drawn out into a breathy moan. Rob. I stepped back, feeling the muscles in my arms go rigid. I bumped into the doorframe and nearly dropped the flashlight. My chest felt tight. I pressed the door close button from the outside, and the elevator hummed shut. I told myself I needed a moment, so I walked away. My heart raced, and my forehead was damp. Later that night, I found the elevator sitting on the 3rd floor by itself. I decided to check inside again, hoping I could figure out if there was some wiring issue. I stepped in, turned my flashlight onto the control panel, and tried to pry it open. The screws were too tight for my pocket multi-tool. I tapped the panel with my knuckles. I wanted to see if anything rattled. I heard a faint static hiss. I listened closely. My name came through again, followed by garbled phrases I couldn't understand. It almost sounded like multiple people whispering at once. I felt my scalp tighten. My arms got goosebumps. I tried to remain calm, but my breathing was loud in my ears. I started pressing the floor buttons to see if it would move. The elevator jerked, then shot up to the 8th floor. My heart hammered as I watched the numbers pass by. When the doors opened on 8, the corridor was dark. Only one overhead bulb was lit, and it flickered like a faulty neon sign. I stepped out, but then the doors closed behind me. I turned around, and the elevator was gone, heading down again. I stood there hearing the mechanical whine of the cables. I felt a knot in my throat. I forced myself to breathe evenly and continued my shift, but I kept feeling like something was following me. On the 5th night, a thunderstorm rolled in around 11. Rain pounded the windows and thunder echoed through the halls. The power flickered a few times, and I started worrying about the elevators getting stuck. By midnight, most of the building's residents were asleep, so I went floor by floor, checking for any water leakage near the windows. The storm made everything more tense. The lights in the corridors kept dimming, and I could hear the wind outside. The elevator dinged repeatedly on random floors, but each time I approached, it closed and moved on before I could get a good look. I felt like it was teasing me. Around 2 in the morning, I saw that the left elevator was stuck on a floor that didn't exist according to the display. The digital panel read something like B2 or 1. I couldn't tell. It looked garbled, almost like an error code, but it had the shape of negative numbers. I stared at it, confused. The building has a basement level, but just one. We don't have a sub-basement or anything else. I pressed the call button. Nothing happened. I stood in the empty lobby, listening to the rain outside and the hum of the emergency lights. Suddenly, the elevator's doors slid open in front of me. A gust of stale air rushed out, and the panel inside glowed with a dim, pulsing light. I stepped in without really thinking. I just felt compelled. My right hand shook a little, but I kept my grip on the flashlight. The doors closed behind me, and the elevator started to descend. The floor indicator read 1, 2, 3, but the building shouldn't have those levels. I felt my stomach drop. The elevator rumbled and shook. The overhead light flickered. I could hear the cables groaning. I tried pressing the open door button, but it did nothing. My breath quickened, my legs felt weak. Eventually, the elevator stopped. The doors opened onto a corridor I had never seen. It stretched far beyond the normal layout of the building. The lighting out there was erratic, with some bulbs flickering on and off. The walls had peeling paint and the air smelled musty, like an abandoned basement. I stepped out, shining my flashlight down the corridor. It seemed to go on forever in both directions. My heart was beating so fast that I could feel it in my temples. I heard whispers coming from behind the walls, like a crowd murmuring. I walked a few steps forward. The floor felt concrete, but it was uneven. Each step echoed. My flashlight beam shook with my trembling hand. A few yards ahead, I noticed dark stains on the wall. They formed partial words, almost like the rust stains in the elevator. They seemed to be incomplete phrases like help or stay or something else. I couldn't read them clearly because they were smeared. My palms were sweaty and my throat felt tight. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. Then I heard my name again, louder this time. It came from behind me. I spun around, pointing my flashlight at the elevator doors, but they were gone. I just saw more corridor. My heart pounded and I fought the urge to bolt. I told myself to stay calm. I took one step back the way I came, then another. I heard the elevator ding again, but it echoed from somewhere else. I followed the sound, turning a corner. The corridor looked the same, with flickering lights and damp walls. I started to lose track of where I was. My breath was shallow, and I felt a pressure in my chest. Eventually, I found the elevator standing open at the end of the hall. The interior lights were dim, and I could see the same clusters of rust forming strange shapes. I rushed inside, desperate to leave that corridor. The doors slid shut and the elevator jerked upward. I felt my knees almost buckle. As it rose, I heard multiple voices whispering. They seemed to talk about the building, mentioning secrets I'd never heard. I caught fragments: foundation, abandoned rooms, sealed walls, cover-up, and whispering nights. I felt a shiver run through my arms. The overhead light flickered and the panel started to warp again, like it was breathing. I pressed the lobby button, hoping it would take me there. The elevator dinged once, then started to slow. The door slid open on a floor that looked normal at first glance. I stepped out and recognized the chipped wallpaper from the older floors. My shoulders relaxed a bit. I was back on the ground floor. I walked into the lobby. The lights in the lobby ceiling flickered, but I could see the main entrance. The storm was still raging outside. I hurried over to the front desk, which is just a small station near the mailboxes. My hands shook as I picked up the phone to check the line, but it was dead. I set the phone down and took a moment to catch my breath. I could feel sweat on my forehead. My heart was hammering. I stared at the elevators for a long time, expecting them to open again. They stayed shut. The building felt too quiet, with only the hum of the lobby lights and the distant rumble of thunder. I ended up pacing around the lobby, waiting for something else to happen. My head spun with everything I'd seen. It didn't feel possible, but I couldn't deny what I experienced. Eventually, I found myself standing in front of the elevator bank again. I felt an urge to pry open the control panel in the lobby, but I also felt this intense dread, like I shouldn't mess with whatever was inside. I took a step toward the panel, but my hand shook. Instead, I just tapped the up arrow. The elevator on the right opened. It looked normal now. The interior light was steady and the panel wasn't glowing. I stepped inside, and I pressed the button for the 10th floor. The elevator responded with a normal hum, no strange noises. When I reached the 10th floor, the doors opened and it looked exactly as it should. I couldn't explain it. I finished the rest of my shift by sitting in the main office behind the lobby, flipping through old building files. I found references to renovations years ago, mentions of sealed-off areas in the basement, but nothing specific about more floors below. I saw a few old photos of the original elevator shafts, but they looked standard. My mind replayed every moment of that strange trip below the basement. The images of the corridor still made my skin crawl. I kept hearing those whispers calling my name in the back of my head. Every time the elevator dinged outside, I jumped. When morning came, I reported some of the issues to my supervisor. I left out the part about the extra floors. I told her the elevator was acting up at random, opening on its own, and making unusual noises. She looked at me like I was complaining too much, but she wrote some notes in her binder. That day, I went home and tried to sleep, but my dreams were all about that corridor. I woke up sweating, my heart pounding. Tonight, I'm back here for my 6th shift. The storm has passed, but the air still feels heavy and damp. The elevators stand silent right now, but I'm on edge. My shift just started. I'm typing up some notes on an old computer in the office, and I'm glancing at the security camera feeds. I can't stop thinking about that whispering voice in the elevator. I keep hearing the static in my head. I can't shake the feeling that the elevator might take me back to that corridor again or someplace worse. My arms tense up whenever I imagine stepping inside. My flashlight is on my belt. My phone is fully charged, and I have a small toolkit ready. I don't know if any of that will help, but I'd rather be prepared. There's a shuffling sound out in the lobby. I check the monitor. The elevator doors are opening. There's no one in front of them. I feel my stomach twist, my teeth clench. I guess I have no choice. I have to go out there. This is my job. I stand up, grab my flashlight, and open the office door. The hallway is dark. My footsteps echo on the old tile floor. The elevator is waiting, doors wide open, light flickering. I feel a cold draft coming from inside the cab. I step forward, my heart pounding in my throat. I'm not sure what I'll see this time, but I can't turn back now. I walk up to the open doors, and I hesitate. The interior panels look the same as before, rust-forming scattered letters. The overhead light flickers, then stabilizes. The control panel glows faintly. I hear a static hiss, and something that sounds like my name. My chest feels tight, and my fingers grip the flashlight. I take a deep breath and step inside. The doors start to close. My stomach clenches, and I press the button for the lobby, hoping it'll stay on the normal floors. The elevator hums. My eyes are on the panel, waiting for the numbers to change. I can't stop my hands from shaking. I don't know if it will take me where I want to go or somewhere else, and I'm not sure which one scares me more. I still remember the first time I saw that opening in the rocky hillside. It was late afternoon, and I was already tired from hiking across uneven ground for most of the day. The entrance looked normal from a distance, maybe a bit wider than the average cave mouth. But as I got closer, I noticed a strong burst of cold air blowing out of it. The wind carried a strange hum, like faint moaning or people whispering. I felt a prickling sensation in my scalp. Something in those sounds got under my skin right away, and I didn't like it. But I'd come out here to find new cave sites for adventure tourism. and I wasn't going to turn around just because of some odd noise. I placed my hand on the rough stone wall at the entrance and took a few steps inside. The temperature dropped fast. My breath came out in short, foggy puffs. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to let them adjust to the dark. There was still enough daylight behind me so I could see a bit of the interior. The place smelled of damp earth, old moss, and something stale. The ground felt uneven under my boots, with gravel that shifted as I stepped. I switched on my headlamp and moved forward. The beam cut through the darkness, showing jagged walls and a tunnel that sloped down. At first it looked like any other natural cave corridor, until that wind blew in again and carried a noise that sounded like a soft plea for help. I stopped. I held my breath. My heart rate went up. I listened closely, but I only heard dripping water and that low whistle of air. A few seconds later, the noise vanished, or maybe it blended back into the background. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and continued. For the next 10 minutes, I made steady progress. The passage got narrower, forcing me to angle my body sideways at times. The walls were damp and gritty, and my clothes picked up dust and bits of rock. Occasionally, I stopped and scanned my surroundings, checking the ceiling, the side walls, and the floor for any sign of instability or hidden drop-offs. I have a solid routine whenever I explore a new cave. Take it slow, map each turn in my head, and keep track of possible hazards. But that strange sound never fully went away. Sometimes I heard what sounded like distant wailing. Other times it resembled a faint whisper. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up every time. A while later, I reached a spot where the passage opened into a wider chamber. My headlamp revealed a ceiling at least 20 feet overhead. Water droplets clung to jagged formations. A few small stalactites hung in clusters, and the floor was uneven, with ridges that formed natural steps. The wind still blew from somewhere, but I couldn't pinpoint the direction anymore. It seemed to come from all around me. I felt a chill on my arms, and I had to rub my hands together to warm them up. That's when I noticed something that didn't seem natural. On one of the walls there were deep scratches, like someone had raked their fingernails against the rock. It's not uncommon to see scratch marks from animals, but these looked too precise and too high up. I leaned in and aimed my flashlight at them. They were arranged in rows, some overlapping. My stomach clenched when I realized they were all about the width of human fingernails. I ran my glove over one of the grooves. The edges felt sharp. I moved my beam along the wall. I spotted more scratches, and next to those I saw a series of symbols carved into the stone. I couldn't recognize any of them. They weren't letters or numbers. They looked more like random shapes arranged in small groups. Each symbol had shallow etchings with uneven lines. My first instinct was to take a picture with my phone, so I pulled it out and snapped a few shots. My flashlight flickered for a moment, and I jiggled it. That flicker made me feel uneasy, like the light might die at any second. I stepped back from the wall and looked around the chamber. The air was still cold, but I could tell the wind was shifting directions. It felt as if it was circling the room. It kept brushing against the back of my neck, raising goosebumps on my skin. That's when I heard my name. I froze. I could have sworn I heard a faint voice say, "Richard." It was stretched out, more like Rychard, and it echoed once before fading. My throat went dry. I tried to steady my breathing. I told myself I must have imagined it, that it was just random cave echoes. But my mind wouldn't let go of the thought that something was calling me. I pushed forward, trying to distract myself by scanning more walls. Every few steps I spotted new symbols. Some were small and clustered together. Others were bigger and spaced out. The scratches became more frequent too, and they ran in chaotic patterns across the stone. I heard dripping water in the distance, which indicated there might be another chamber ahead. My curiosity spiked again. Despite the weird feeling in my gut, I wanted to see more of this place. I kept going. I entered a narrower tunnel that led away from the main chamber. The walls pressed in on both sides, forcing me to duck my head at times. My boots slipped on a patch of wet stone, and I had to steady myself against the wall. My hands came away muddy. The air smelled stronger here, like wet rock and stale breath. The wind came again, blowing toward me this time. It felt like a sudden gust in an enclosed space, which made no sense. It carried a faint moaning that sounded closer than before. I shone my light ahead and saw the tunnel open up into another chamber. I stepped inside. It was a bit smaller than the first one, with a lower ceiling. The floor was uneven, scattered with small rocks and puddles of water. The scratch marks covered almost every surface I could see. There was a cluster of those strange symbols on the far wall. They looked fresher, as if someone had carved them recently. I approached carefully. My skin was tingling. The voice that said my name echoed again, only louder. It sounded like a group of voices now, all whispering Richard at the same time. My heart pounded so hard, I felt it in my ears. I swept my flashlight across the symbols. They seemed arranged in a circular pattern with lines connecting them. My eyes picked up a deeper set of grooves near the bottom, almost like an outline of a hand or a footprint, but not quite. I reached out to trace them, but I hesitated. My instincts told me not to touch anything. My palm was sweating inside my glove. I backed away and tried to collect my thoughts. My mind was racing, jumping between the excitement of discovering something unknown and the urge to leave immediately. I decided I had gone far enough. The sounds were growing louder, and I kept feeling that cold wind swirl around me. My chest felt tight. My breath quickened. I wanted to get back outside, send my location info to my contacts, and return later with better gear and maybe another person. These conditions were too bizarre for me to handle alone. I turned around and headed back the way I came. At first, I retraced my steps through the smaller tunnel. It seemed familiar. I remembered the muddy patch and the slippery stone, but the path felt longer than before. I kept walking, but I didn't see the signs I expected. I used my flashlight to look for my footprints, but the ground was rocky in most places, so I only saw a few faint impressions. The deeper I went, the more I started to doubt I was on the right path. The passage twisted slightly, and I didn't recall that turn. My breathing became labored. I told myself to stay calm. I slowed down, checking the walls for any recognizable marks. But the scratches and symbols were everywhere, repeating in random patterns, so they didn't help. I stopped and looked for the glow of daylight. Nothing. I turned off my flashlight for a second, hoping to see a hint of outside light. The darkness swallowed me. My ears rang with the sound of my own breathing. Then I heard that chorus of voices whisper my name again, but this time it seemed to come from every direction. I flicked my flashlight back on, my hands shaking a bit. I tried to push down my panic and think logically. I reminded myself I had only come through one main route, so the exit had to be somewhere in front of me if I kept going. I followed the tunnel further, but the walls began to change. The rock composition looked different, smoother in some spots and rougher in others. There were more droplets of water running down. The air felt heavier. My headlamp started to flicker again. I smacked it with the palm of my hand. It stayed on, but the light looked dimmer. I cursed under my breath and picked up the pace. I spotted another opening ahead, a bit to the left. My instincts told me it might be the original chamber, but when I got there, it wasn't. It was a dead end with nothing but piles of loose rocks. I turned around, shining the flashlight on the walls, trying to find the correct passage. The sounds around me grew louder. Those voices seemed to merge into one continuous moan. My heart thumped. My mouth felt dry, and my tongue was sticking to the roof. I forced myself to keep moving, scanning each crevice. My boots slid on damp stones. My shoulder brushed against a jagged edge, and I felt a sharp sting. My jacket tore, but I didn't stop to examine the cut. I needed to get out. After several more minutes, I found a corridor that looked a bit more familiar. It had a slight upward slope, which I remembered. I breathed out a shaky sigh and hurried along. I expected to see the large chamber with the high ceiling any second, but when I stepped through, I saw a different chamber. This one was smaller, with a ring of water puddles around the edges and a single stalagmite in the center. I hadn't been there before. The wind whipped past me, but this time it blew inward as though it was coming from behind me and heading deeper into the cave. I heard faint sobbing sounds drifting on that cold draft. I yelled, Hello? My voice echoed, but no one answered. It felt wrong to speak in that place. The echo of my own voice sent a shiver through my spine. I pressed on, determined to find a path out. Every step felt heavier, like the air was squeezing my chest. My flashlight beam shook from the tremor in my hands. The walls glistened with moisture, and I saw more scratch marks. Some of them looked like they dug even deeper into the stone, as if made by someone in a desperate struggle. At one point I stopped because I heard my name repeated in a rapid whisper. Richard, Richard, Richard. It came from the darkness behind me. I spun around and held my flashlight high. I saw nothing but the shine of wet rock and scattered shadows. The hair on my arms stood on end. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I took a step backward, and I almost lost my footing on a loose rock. I realized I was near panic. My breathing was too fast. I tried to slow it down. I needed to think straight. I forced myself to keep moving, scanning the floor for footprints or any sign of my earlier path. Everything looked different. The environment seemed to shift. The wind still blew, but it felt stronger, carrying low moans that overlapped. My thoughts kept jumping around. I tried to remember exactly how many turns I took coming in, how many times I passed a certain formation. It was like the cave had changed shape behind me. Another 10 minutes passed, at least it felt like 10 minutes, before I spotted something familiar. There was a small crack in the wall near the floor, and I remembered stepping over it. My chest flooded with relief. I moved faster, but then I saw that the corridor led me to a new chamber that I didn't remember at all. My flashlight picked out a wide opening on the far side. The wind howled through that opening like a tunnel for a storm. I gritted my teeth and moved toward it. If I couldn't find the entrance I used before, maybe I could find another exit. I inched through that wide opening. It led into a tunnel that sloped upward. My spirits lifted. If it went up, there was a chance it reached the surface. The wind was blasting from that direction, cold and relentless. It felt like it was pushing me back. I had to brace my feet to keep from stumbling. My eyes watered from the chill. The echo of voices grew louder. They sounded like pleas, half-formed words, cries that I couldn't identify. They swirled around me, swirling with the wind. I pressed on, step by step. My legs started to ache and my lungs burned from the damp, cold air. I felt sweat running down my back under my jacket. Finally, I saw what looked like an opening overhead. The beam of my flashlight showed a rocky slope that led up to a crack in the ceiling. I climbed carefully, gripping the rock with my gloved hands, looking for stable footholds. But when I got close, I saw it was just a deep recess, not an exit. My heart sank. I fought the urge to yell in frustration. The moaning voices behind me seemed to get closer. I could feel the vibrations in the stone beneath my fingers. I scrambled back down, almost twisting my ankle as I landed. I coughed, my throat raw from the cold and from panting so hard. I checked my phone for any signal, knowing it was probably useless. The screen read, "No service." I tucked it away and switched my flashlight to a lower setting to save battery. My hands shook. My thoughts reeled between anger at the situation and fear that I might never find my way out. But I refused to think that way for long. I had to focus on finding a path. I went back along the tunnel, feeling every inch of the walls. I stumbled on loose rocks more than once. One time I fell to one knee and scraped it against a sharp edge. Pain shot through my leg. I clenched my jaw to keep from shouting. My kneecap throbbed. The voices were louder now, repeating my name in overlapping murmurs. My flashlight flickered again, and this time it stayed dimmer than before. I slapped it, but it didn't help much. Eventually, I came to a place where the passage seemed to split in two directions. One corridor sloped slightly downward. The other looked level. Neither looked inviting. The wind was coming from somewhere else now, maybe behind the walls or through cracks. I couldn't pinpoint it. My chest tightened, and I felt a rush of panic in my stomach. My mouth felt like sand. My mind bounced between the two choices. I picked the level corridor. I walked for a few minutes, hearing water dripping and the crunch of gravel under my boots. The walls were less jagged here, as if worn smooth by ancient flows of water. I tried to keep my attention on the possibility of finding any natural light. But every time I looked ahead, all I saw was darkness. My flashlight was the only source of illumination, and it was weak. The voices still buzzed around me, sometimes sounding right next to my ear. I kept twisting my head to check, but there was no one there. Then I heard a rush of air behind me. I felt it on my back. It sounded like a heavy sigh, almost an exhale from something large. I spun around. The corridor was empty, but my flashlight flickered across the walls. I stepped backward, keeping my eyes on that spot. The sound happened again, a low, drawn-out moan. My name was in it. Unmistakable. Richard! My entire body broke out in goosebumps. I gripped my flashlight until my knuckles hurt. I forced my legs to move faster. I had to find a way out, or at least find the main chamber again. My lungs ached as I breathed in the cold, stale air. My knee kept throbbing from the fall. The floor dipped a bit and I slipped. I landed on my side and felt rocks dig into my ribs. I cursed and pushed myself up. My flashlight almost fell from my grip. A wave of pain shot through my hip, but I ignored it. I kept going. At last I reached another chamber. The wind was stronger here, blowing inward. I recognized some of the scratch marks on the walls. I realized it was the first wide chamber I'd entered, but now the opening to the outside wasn't where I remembered it. The wall at the far end was solid stone. My chest pounded. My breath caught in my throat. That's where the exit had been, or at least that's what I thought. Now it was gone or sealed off. The wind hissed all around me, carrying desperate murmurs that made my ears buzz. I ran my hand over the wall, feeling for any crevice. It was rough and cold, but there was no gap. I slammed my fist against it. The sound echoed and the whispering rose into a louder chorus. My name repeated over and over, rolling around the space like a wave of sound. My pulse raced so fast I thought I'd pass out. I stumbled back and tried to shine my light on every corner of the chamber. No exit. The only way out was the way I came in. I collapsed on one knee, gasping for air. My hands shook. I tried to think of a plan, but the voices kept coming, echoing my name in a desperate chant. I felt the cold wind swirl toward me from the interior of the cave, bringing that chorus right into my face. It felt like the entire place was alive, pressing in. I stood up, forcing myself to move. I had to keep going, even if I had to crawl my way back. I walked to the passage that led deeper inside, the same passage I'd taken before. The wind whistled around the corner and the moaning got louder. I steeled myself and stepped forward. I knew that was my only option. My body felt heavy, but I pressed on, letting the cold drafts guide me into the darkness. The voices kept whispering my name, and I felt them right behind me. I just kept walking, determined to find another path to the surface, no matter how long it took. I always thought my days behind the microphone were over for good. Then, one evening, I found myself kneeling on the wooden floor of my attic, connecting old cables to a makeshift transmitter, my hands shaking from a mix of excitement and unease. I had no intention of going back to the life I left behind, but something about that dusty equipment called to me. I felt a strong urge to see if anything still traveled across those forgotten frequencies. I never expected the signal I picked up. I'm a retired radio host. I worked for 3 decades at a local station, hosting late-night talk shows where I'd chat about sports, local events, and sometimes weird news segments just to keep people awake. When I stepped away, I thought I'd left every part of that life in the studio, but I kept an old box of radio parts in the attic. I told myself I was too old to tinker, but I still climbed up there at least once a month to look through old microphones and cables. That box was a piece of my history, even if it had no real use anymore. One night I stumbled across some vintage vacuum tubes that I'd forgotten I owned. They reminded me of the golden age of radio. I sat on a folding chair in the attic, shining a flashlight around, and saw that I had enough equipment to set up an amateur station. It felt like a harmless hobby, like building a birdhouse or restoring an old model train. So I brushed off the dust, brought in a small table, set up a shortwave receiver, and added a microphone. The attic smelled musty, the insulation exposed in places with wooden beams above my head. The space was cramped, but it felt private. I had no intention of broadcasting anything big. I just wanted to explore the airwaves. At first, I spent my free time spinning the dial, scanning for ham radio signals, picking up bits of static and random chatter in foreign languages. Nothing special came through. The nights got repetitive. I'd sit there, jot down frequencies and times, then shut it down and go to bed. My back started to ache from the old chair, and the chill in the attic got to me in the early hours. But it felt good to do something with my hands again. I liked the faint hum of the receiver and the glow of the little indicator lights. I remember the first time I heard the strange transmission. It was late. I was tired, leaning forward with my elbows on the table, eyes half closed. A burst of static cut through the quiet, and I caught a short phrase. It was garbled, almost like Morse code, but with a different pattern. It repeated a few times, then vanished. I got a chill, but I dismissed it as some glitch or random data signal from who knows where. The frequency was around 3 Mariners, but I couldn't get an exact lock. I turned off the set and went to bed. Over the next few nights, that signal came back. It always sounded faint, wrapped in heavy static. It would broadcast a series of sounds that almost resembled a human voice but distorted, like it was underwater. Then, sometimes, a short beep followed. The beep repeated 3 times. I thought it might be some weather station or a rogue beacon. The pattern was consistent. Always the same length, always broken up by those 3 beeps at the end. At first I tried to record it, but my old reel-to-reel setup jammed, and I only captured garbled noise. I told myself I'd sort it out later. One evening, I got frustrated with the noise. I leaned into the microphone and said, "If you're out there, do something different." I wasn't expecting an answer. I was just venting. But right after I spoke, I heard a sudden burst of static. It rose and fell in a way I'd never heard before. I stared at the receiver, feeling my heartbeat jump. It felt like the transmission reacted to my voice. I sat there for a long moment, waiting for it to repeat, but it went silent. The next day, I tried to convince myself that I'd imagined it. I told myself that maybe there was a short in the wiring, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. That night, I returned to the attic, turned on the equipment, and scanned. I waited for the strange signal, feeling that cold ache in my stomach that you get when you anticipate something you don't understand. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, around midnight, the static changed again. A faint whistle threaded through the noise, and I heard what sounded like a voice. It wasn't clear enough to identify words, but it rose and fell like speech. Then I heard the beep. 3 times, just like before. I pressed the push-to-talk button. "Can you hear me?" I asked. My own voice sounded strange in that quiet attic. I let go of the button. Static. "If this is someone messing around, it's not funny," I said, pressing the button again. I waited. The hiss of static continued, then it abruptly cut off. Silence. I stared at the speaker. The small dial on the receiver flickered. I felt sweat forming on my forehead. Then the static returned, and underneath it, I heard a single word that sounded like my name, Howard. But it was drawn out, like a stretched recording. It sounded close, like it was right in the room. I leaned back and looked around the attic. The only light came from a single bulb above me, casting shadows along the rafters. My breath felt shallow. I kept thinking I'd see someone at the top of the stairs, but I was alone. I gripped the microphone, but I didn't say anything else that night. I just sat there until the signal faded, and then I turned everything off and went downstairs, trying to calm myself. The following nights, I couldn't sleep. My curiosity won out, and I went back to the attic to listen again. Each time I heard bits of that voice. It wasn't always clear. Sometimes it was just a drone or a moan under the static. Other times, I could almost make out words. I started writing down the scraps, hoping to decode them. I got fragments like "you did this," or "it's in your head." I told myself that maybe my imagination was filling in blanks. The The static was heavy, and old equipment can do strange things. One night I said out loud, "What do you want?" I listened, heart pounding. After a few seconds I heard a long hiss. Then a voice said, "Confess." It was quiet, but the word felt sharp. I dropped my notepad. I tried to speak again, but my throat felt tight. My hands shook. I looked around as if expecting to see someone hidden behind the old boxes in the corner. No one was there. I started to feel uneasy in my own home. The attic felt hostile, like the air was too thick. My chest felt tight every time I turned on the receiver. But I couldn't stop. I spent hours tinkering with knobs trying to trace the origin of the signal. It didn't match any known broadcast pattern. Sometimes I caught it on slightly different frequencies, as if it moved around. Every time I tried to respond, the static spiked. It felt like the signal didn't want me to question it. It felt like it wanted me to listen. One night, the static intensified. It sounded like a storm on the air. I could feel the low buzz of it in my teeth. I reached for the volume knob, but the hiss grew louder. I got up to unplug the equipment, but then I heard a new voice under the static. It was calmer, but more personal. It said my name again, Howard, followed by a sentence. "Why did you lie?" I froze. My mind raced. I didn't know what it referred to. I stood there in the half-dark, the glow from the receiver reflecting off a metallic tool chest. My heart hammered so hard that my vision blurred at the edges. I took a few deep breaths, trying to steady myself, but my body was tense. I forced myself to speak. Lie about what? Who is this? I expected static. Instead, I got a series of clicking sounds that reminded me of teeth chattering, then a faint laugh. It seemed to come through the speaker, but at the same time, I felt like it was in the room. I spun around, convinced I wasn't alone. My skin prickled. I could smell something like hot dust, the way old electronics smell when they're overworked. I took a step back, nearly stumbling over a tangle of cables. The laugh stopped. Static again. Over the next few days, I tried to ignore the attic. I stayed in the lower part of the house, kept the trapdoor shut, and avoided that musty smell. But at night, I couldn't sleep. My dreams were full of static. I heard the beeps in my sleep 3 times, over and over. My jaw clenched whenever I thought about that voice. I wanted to throw the equipment out. But at the same time, I felt a pull to return. It was a strange feeling, like I was locked in a conversation I couldn't end. So eventually, I decided to confront it. I climbed back up with a flashlight. It was around 11 at night. The air felt cold, even though the rest of the house was warm. I knelt down by the table, turned on the receiver, and waited. The static was soft at first. I said, "All right, I'm here. Say what you need to say." My voice sounded shaky, but I kept my grip on the microphone. The static rose. I heard that quiet mumbling again. Then a phrase broke through. "You hid it." I asked, "Hid what?" The response came in a low murmur. "You know?" I felt a shiver run down my spine. I whispered, "I don't know what you're talking about." Then I heard my own name repeated in a harsh tone. "Howard, you know." The last word dragged out until it dissolved into a rasp. I realized I was sweating. My shirt stuck to my back, and my mouth tasted bitter. I set the microphone down, thinking I'd had enough. But the voice kept going, repeating, you know, like a broken record. Then it stopped and the static faded. The transmission ended for the night. I went downstairs in a daze, locked the attic door, and tried to push the incident out of my head. In the following days, I kept the attic locked. I tried to go about my normal life. I cleaned the kitchen, watched TV, even visited some old coworkers for coffee. But at the back of my mind, I felt an itch. The voice had sounded like someone I once knew. The tone, the pacing, it reminded me of a friend I had argued with long ago. But that friend lived across the country, and I hadn't spoken to him in years. It made no sense. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of recognition. Late one afternoon, I heard a humming sound coming from above. It was faint, like an old air conditioner running behind the walls. I opened the attic door a crack and heard the radio static, though I was sure I'd turned the set off. I went up carefully, step by step. The radio was on. The power light glowed a dull orange. My heart jumped. I know I didn't leave it plugged in. I approached the table and saw the microphone lying on its side. The speaker hissed with a low pulse. I felt my stomach tighten. I reached out to shut it off, but before I touched the switch, the static surged. A voice spoke again. "Stop running." My hand was still in the air. I felt the skin on my arms tighten with goosebumps. I didn't speak. I just stared. The static expanded, filling the room with a roaring noise. I had to cover my ears. I shouted, "Who are you?" The static dropped for a moment, then I heard a whisper. "Behind you." I spun around so fast I knocked over my chair. Nobody was there, but I felt something. The air felt charged, like the space behind me was occupied by something breathing. I lurched forward, nearly tripping on the cables. My pulse pounded in my neck. I turned back to the radio, intending to unplug it. My hand shook as I reached for the cord. Another surge of static hit, and I heard a long, drawn-out groan. It sounded like it was coming from the far corner of the attic. I turned my flashlight in that direction, but I saw only old boxes and piles of junk. Yet I heard the floor creak. It sounded like footsteps coming closer. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing up. The footsteps stopped a few feet away from me. My breathing got ragged. The static softened, and a voice said, "You can't hide." I yanked the cord from the socket. The radio went dead. My flashlight flickered. The footsteps stopped. The attic fell silent. I just stood there, panting, trying to make sense of it. My heart thumped so loud it hurt. My mind felt like it was spinning, trying to figure out if something was in there with me, or if I was having some sort of breakdown. I left the attic and locked the door. That night, I hardly slept. Every sound in the house made me jump. The next day, I tried to get rid of the equipment. I carried the pieces down to the garage, but I couldn't bring myself to dump them. I felt an odd connection, like if I threw them away, I'd be giving up on finding answers. I left them in the corner of the garage, covered with a tarp, thinking I could decide later. That same night, I heard the attic door creaking on its own. I ran to check and it was shut, but I heard faint static through the ceiling. I pressed my ear against the door. The radio was back on. This time, the voice was clearer than ever. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught phrases. "He's not honest. He kept it hidden. He deserves it." My chest felt tight. I kept thinking it would name something specific, but it never did. It just accused me of things I'd never told anyone. The words, "You deserve this," echoed in my mind. I had no idea what I deserved. I gathered my courage and opened the attic door. The static was loud and pulsing. I climbed up, feeling sweat on my forehead. I saw the radio on the table again, plugged in, but I was sure I left it in the garage. The microphone was upright, as if someone had placed it there. My head spun. I walked over, determined to shut it off, but I heard a voice behind me. "I'm here." I spun around. Nobody. But I felt warmth on my neck like breath. I lost my composure and shouted, "Stop it!" Then the static died. Silence. Total silence. I stood there, gripping the edge of the table for support. My hands trembled so much I could hardly stand. I felt a presence just a few inches behind me, like a person looming over my shoulder. My limbs felt heavy. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. Then I heard a faint whisper in my ear. It had the tone of someone I once cared about, but it was twisted. It said, "You can't escape." My heartbeat hammered. I spun around, half expecting to see a figure. There was only the low light from the bare bulb. The floorboards creaked under my feet. My vision blurred with tears I didn't even realize were forming. The presence lingered. I could sense it. I realized that something was trying to come through the radio. It wasn't just a voice on the airwaves. It was more than that. It wanted to break the barrier between sound and physical space. I swallowed hard, feeling dryness in my throat. I reached out and grabbed the radio, ripping cables out without looking. The static cut off for good. The presence faded, but I still felt uneasy, like it was waiting. I backed toward the stairs, not turning my back on that corner of the attic. Then I got out of there. I haven't touched a radio since that night. I haven't been back to the attic, and I keep the door locked. I don't care if it's irrational. Something waits up there, something that feels tied to my past in ways I still don't understand. I can't explain how the equipment turned on by itself or how the voice knew my name and my secrets. I just know I heard it, and I felt it standing behind me. I'm done trying to figure out if it's in my head or if it's real. I don't want to give it another chance to cross over. That's all I can say. I'm leaving the attic alone. If something's there, it can stay in the static. I don't have any more confessions to make. I stepped out of my car that evening with rainwater streaming down my collar. The storm had turned violent about an hour before, and I couldn't see the road beyond a few yards. My windshield wipers were useless against the downpour. My hands were shaking from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. I spotted a sign that said "Vacancy" on an old wooden pole, half hidden by the darkness and sheets of rain. I parked close to the building, hoping I could dash inside without getting drenched any worse than I already was. I walked in and found a cramped lobby with faded wallpaper and a low ceiling. A single lamp flickered in a corner. The air smelled musty, and the floor creaked under my shoes. I saw a small bell on the counter. I tapped it. The metal ding sounded weak, barely audible above the wind rattling the windows. A woman emerged from a back room. She wore a thick sweater and had dark circles under her eyes. She looked at me with a tired expression. I asked if she had a room for the night. She nodded. She took my credit card and typed something into an ancient-looking computer, then handed me a key. Room 3. I thanked her and asked if there was any food available. She told me the kitchen had closed earlier, but there was a vending machine down the hall. She pointed left. I noticed her nails were chipped, and she looked like she wanted to leave the conversation as soon as possible. I turned away, walked down the narrow corridor, and heard a sudden sound of the wind slamming against a loose window frame somewhere in the building. I felt a chill run through me, but I blamed it on the cold water soaking my shirt. The vending machine offered stale chips and lukewarm soda. I grabbed a bag of chips and a can of cola. My stomach felt hollow and I didn't have the energy to complain. I just wanted to get to my room, peel off my wet clothes and rest. I headed back to the lobby. The woman was gone again, so I made my way up the stairs to the second floor. The walls were thin, and I could hear the storm raging outside. The building shook whenever a gust of wind struck. The hallway light flickered every now and then. The carpet felt damp under my shoes, which only made me more uncomfortable. I opened the door to room 3. It was small. There was a single bed with an old comforter that smelled like it hadn't been washed in a while. A wooden dresser stood in the corner, chipped at the edges. Next to the bed, there was a nightstand with a lamp that emitted a dull glow. The window overlooked the parking lot and the empty road. Rain battered the glass nonstop. I noticed a small closet. I dropped my violin case there. I'd brought my violin because I had been on my way to a workshop out of town, planning to teach a weekend seminar. I was a music professor, mostly for classical strings. Now I was stuck in this inn until the storm let up. The first time I heard the bells, I thought it was my imagination. It sounded like a soft chime carried by the wind. I paused in the middle of unbuttoning my shirt. I listened hard, my head tilted. The sound seemed to fade. I exhaled and finished changing into dry clothes, a pair of sweatpants and a long-sleeve shirt. I was cold, but at least I was no longer dripping with rainwater. I sat on the edge of the bed and tore open the bag of chips. They were stale, but I ate them anyway. My head was throbbing and the only thing I wanted was sleep. But the lightning and thunder outside made that impossible. The entire room flashed white every few seconds. The thunder shook the walls. Every time a bolt of lightning struck, I thought the power might go out. Then I heard the bells again, faint but clear. It wasn't the same as a clock tower striking the hour. It was more scattered, like a random sequence of rings. I got up and went to the window, squinting outside. The wind whipped tree branches back and forth. The parking lot was empty except for my car. There were no church steeples or bell towers anywhere nearby. I couldn't see anything but darkness and blurred shapes of trees. The sound of bells stopped again. I remembered the woman at the counter telling me about the wind. She had brushed it off. I told myself that it must be some odd effect of metal roof parts banging outside or something similar. I turned off the lamp and got under the covers. I tried to block out the storm. The wind kept howling, and the windows rattled nonstop. I felt my heart pounding because I was tired and tense. Then the bells started again, louder this time. I tensed up, waiting for the sound to go away. It didn't. It rose and fell with the wind. Each ring made my muscles tighten. I felt my heart beat in my ears, and each pulse seemed to line up with the bells. It was like a distant echo of my own heartbeat. I sat up again, breathing hard. I flicked on the lamp and stared around the room. Everything looked normal. The walls were worn, the furniture old, the floor dusty. The bells sounded close, almost right outside my window. I went over to check again, but all I could see was the storm. My palms were sweating. My chest felt tight. I tried to calm myself by taking slow breaths. The bells kept ringing, always in that scattered, uneven rhythm. I put on my shoes, grabbed my key, and walked downstairs to the lobby. The desk was empty. I leaned over the counter and called out. After a few seconds, the woman appeared from the back. She looked irritated. I asked her about the bells. She said she had never heard any bells around here, especially not at night. She reminded me that the wind made all kinds of noises when it was this stormy. I told her it sounded too much like actual bells. She repeated that there were no bells in the area. No churches for miles, no wind chimes on the property. She told me to get some rest. I stood there in the lobby for a moment, listening to the building groan under the pressure of the storm. I felt foolish, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Eventually, I went back to my room. The bells started up again as soon as I entered. They sounded even more insistent. I sat on the bed and tried to ignore them. My mind wouldn't settle. My chest felt tight. I tried to focus on normal everyday details, but the ringing invaded my thoughts, matching every beat of my heart. I reached for my violin case. I thought maybe I could distract myself by playing something simple. I set up my shoulder rest, tightened the bow, and took a moment to test the strings. They were in tune. I raised the instrument to my chin and tried to play a short, calm piece. As soon as I drew the bow across the strings, I heard the bells inside the notes, as if they had blended with the tone. It was faint at first, but then it got stronger. My hands trembled. The pitch of the violin clashed with the sound of the bells. They seemed to create a discordant echo that pulsed in my ears. I stopped playing and lowered the violin. My breathing was ragged. I set the violin on the bed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My head felt heavy, and my throat was dry. The bells weren't stopping. They followed me, no matter how hard I tried to block them out. I walked back and forth across the room, hoping the movement would calm me. It didn't help. The wind slammed against the window and the thunder kept rolling. The bells were the worst. They felt like they were right next to me sometimes. My heart thumped fast, and the bells thumped with it. I decided to go outside, even in the storm, just to see if there was something out there making the noise. I grabbed my jacket and stepped into the hallway. The corridor was dim. The stairwell felt cramped. I stepped into the lobby and walked past the counter. I could see the woman's shape in the back room, but I didn't want to bother her again. I headed for the main door and opened it. Rain blew in my face, and the wind nearly knocked me backward. I forced my way outside. I stood under a small awning and looked around the parking lot. Rain pelted my jacket and jeans. The thunder was louder out here. Lightning lit up the sky for a split second at a time. I scanned the area for anything that could sound like bells. A piece of loose metal, a sign, anything. I couldn't see anything suspicious. Just my car, a few puddles, and the outline of trees. The bell sounds seemed to come from nowhere in particular. They were everywhere and nowhere, carried on the wind. I felt my jaw tighten. My breath came in gasps. My head pounded. My own pulse felt erratic. I backed away from the rain and returned inside, shaking water from my sleeves. I climbed the stairs again, feeling a dull ache in my legs. I shut my room door behind me, locked it, and leaned against it. The lights flickered once. The bells grew louder, as if they were mocking the hum of the ceiling fixture. I waited, but the power stayed on. I pushed away from the door and sat on the bed. My heart rate refused to slow down. The bells seemed to press on my eardrums. They rose and fell in waves, matching the intensity of the rain outside, but also matching my heartbeat. My thoughts raced. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe I was under too much stress. But the bells sounded real, and the headache they caused felt real. Lightning flashed again, bright enough to illuminate the entire room for a second. Thunder shook the walls. The roof groaned like it might tear free. The bells clanged along, heavy and unrelenting. I squeezed my eyes shut. My head felt squeezed by pressure. I could feel sweat on my forehead and in the small of my back. I tried to count backward from 10, but each number got lost in the noise. The air smelled damp, almost moldy. I stood up, pacing again, desperate for relief. I picked up my violin, thinking maybe if I played louder I could drown out the bells. I placed it under my chin and drew the bow across the strings in a forceful stroke. The sound filled the small room, but the bells merged with the pitch. They twisted each note into something irregular and dissonant. I stopped after a few seconds, panting. My arms felt weak. I set the violin aside. The storm hammered the building without pause. The hallway light outside my door flicked off, leaving only the glow from my bedside lamp. I paced to the window. The glass shook. The wind was a deafening roar. The bells climbed to a point where I felt them vibrating in my skull. My heart pounded in my chest, and each beat synced up with the ringing. I clenched my fists, teeth grinding. I wanted to run outside and scream at the storm, but I knew it wouldn't help. The bells were inside me somehow. Thunder roared again. The lamp by the bed flickered. For a split second, darkness swallowed everything. Then the light came back, weak and flickering. The bells blared at full volume. I pressed my hands to my ears and stumbled against the dresser. The corner dug into my hip. I hissed in pain. My ears rang with the bells, which felt impossibly loud now, hammering in perfect sync with my heartbeat. My breathing turned shallow. I pushed away from the dresser and slid down to sit on the floor. My back scraped against the wall. My chest rose and fell fast. The bells repeated the same pattern, over and over, never slowing. The storm's thunder merged with the bells in my head. I was sure I would pass out if this continued. I couldn't hear my own thoughts anymore. My eyes darted around the room, landing on the violin lying on the bed, the suitcase in the corner, the scuffed floor, the single lamp, the door. Everything felt unreal because of that relentless noise. Lightning exploded outside, lighting the room in a harsh flash. The lamp blinked out. Thunder followed so close behind that the walls rattled. I clenched my jaw and tasted blood on my lip from biting it. The bells reached a maddening volume like they were next to me. My heart slammed in my chest, thudding against my ribs. My fingers shook so much I couldn't hold them still. My mouth felt dry, and I struggled to swallow. I forced myself to stand. My legs wobbled. I grabbed the nightstand for support, nearly knocking over the lamp. The light was gone, so all I had was the flicker of lightning outside. I could see the window in front of me. The glass vibrated with every gust of wind. I saw the reflection of my pale face for an instant when lightning flashed. My hair was plastered to my forehead with sweat. My eyes looked wide and unfocused. I turned around and tried to find my phone. I saw its outline on the dresser. I lunged for it, knocking a small ceramic cup to the floor. It shattered, and I felt the pieces under my bare foot. I felt a sharp pain, but I ignored it. I grabbed the phone and pressed the power button. No signal, no service. The storm must have knocked out the towers or something. No internet, no way to make a call. I glanced at the door, thinking I could run downstairs, but the idea of leaving the room while feeling like this made me dizzy. The bells kept pounding in my ears. Then came the climax of the storm. Rain slammed the window, sounding like hail. Thunder boomed in quick succession, each strike shaking the inn. I heard the building's roof groan. The bells reached a peak I didn't think possible. My skull felt like it was vibrating. I gripped my head with both hands and felt my pulse pounding. I could smell my own sweat and the stale odor of the room. Each breath I took felt like it wasn't enough air. I collapsed onto the bed, pressing my palms to my ears. I wanted to make any sense of the noise, but all I got was that repetitive, crushing ring. The thunder crashed again. Lightning turned the window into a white rectangle. The bells hammered away. My heart raced, my chest tightening. I couldn't breathe properly. I shut my eyes and curled up against the pillows, trying to make myself as small as possible. My hearing started to blur everything except the bells. The wind and thunder faded to a background roar. I felt sweat dripping down my temples. My teeth were chattering from a combination of fear, cold, and exhaustion. I tried to focus on a single detail, the pattern of the bells. They repeated an uneven sequence. I could almost pick out a short motif that repeated every few seconds. It matched my pulse, refusing to let me relax. The storm showed no sign of stopping. The wind roared outside and the old walls creaked. I held myself together by focusing on each breath I took, one after the other, in short, jagged pulls of air. The bells eventually reached a point where I could barely differentiate one ring from the next. It all merged into one continuous note. My heartbeat forced that note to keep time with my chest. It felt like a painful echo in my ears. Then the thunder slammed the sky one more time, shaking everything. The lights flickered. The continuous ring of the bells surged and seemed to break, splitting into a chorus of separate clangs. I sucked in a breath and held it. My temples throbbed and I almost blacked out. The force of the noise seemed impossible. My eyes watered, and I couldn't think or speak. Then, as if a switch had been thrown, the bells receded in one sharp cutoff. They vanished, leaving a dense silence behind. My ears rang with the aftermath, but the direct pounding was gone. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the fading rumble of thunder. I lay there in the dark, soaked in sweat, with my arms wrapped around my head. The silence felt jarring after the chaos. My heart still pounded, but the bells didn't match it anymore. Rain continued to fall outside, though it seemed to calm a bit. I tasted salt on my lips from my own sweat. My hands trembled as I lowered them from my ears. I heard no bells at all. My ears buzzed with numb static. I didn't move for a long time. My foot hurt from where the ceramic cup had cut it, and my hip ached from hitting the dresser. Eventually, I managed to sit up, gripping the side of the bed for support. My breathing slowed. Outside, the storm continued to rumble, but it was less intense. Lightning still flickered, but not as bright, and thunder echoed further away. I realized that the silence of those bells felt unnerving, but at least my heart wasn't racing in my throat. I stayed in that inn room until morning, too drained to do anything else. I left as soon as daylight broke, even though it was still raining. I never looked back. The roads were slick, but the storm was weaker. My head pounded, but I heard no bells for the rest of the drive. The memory still makes my pulse spike whenever I think about it. I can still feel the echo of those bells when I remember the storm, like some part of it never left my ears. But I haven't heard them again, and I hope I never do. I moved into the old studio on a Sunday afternoon. The stairs leading up to the second floor felt shaky under my boots. The paint on the banister was cracked, and the air smelled like dust and something damp. I didn't care. I needed a cheap place to work, and this was the only spot I could afford. I carried my boxes up one by one, taking breaks whenever my arms got tired. The hallway outside my door had a single light bulb that flickered whenever I walked past it. I remember thinking the place looked sad, with water stains on the walls and scuffed floorboards. But it was mine for the next few months. The first night I tried to settle in. I unpacked my paints, my brushes, and a few rolled up canvases. There was a small cot in the corner where I planned to sleep. When I lay down, I noticed how quiet everything was. No traffic, no voices. I only heard the ticking of an old metal clock I'd hung on a nail. After a few minutes, I drifted off. The night was uneventful until around 3 a.m. That's when I heard the first set of noises. I woke up to light popping and creaking coming from the wall near my head. The sound reminded me of wood expanding, but it had a sharper tone, almost like knuckles cracking. My heart pounded a bit, but I calmed down and told myself it was just an old building. I forced myself to go back to sleep. In the morning, I walked over to the spot where I'd heard the noise. The wall was bare except for a few faint marks. They weren't scratches and they weren't dents. They were small grooves, like someone had taken a thin chisel and pressed it lightly into the plaster. Each mark was about the size of a thumbnail. I brushed my fingertips over them. The edges felt rough and unfinished. I shrugged it off. I figured the place had been through a lot of tenants, and maybe somebody had done some weird decorating once upon a time. That day, I focused on setting up my painting area. I had a sturdy easel that I placed near the window. The light was decent, even though the glass was a bit dirty. I set out my oil paints, my palette, and a jar for cleaning brushes. I like to keep my space organized, so I arranged my brushes by size and shape on a small table. Then I worked on a new painting. It was a piece I'd been thinking about for a while, just a study of a street corner at sunset. I wanted to practice light and shadow. I spent hours mixing pigments trying to get the sky right. I forgot about the strange marks on the wall. That night I went to bed a bit earlier. I was tired from painting all day. I slept deeply until the noises woke me again. This time they were louder, and I could feel a vibration in the floor when I opened my eyes. I looked around. The studio was dark except for a thin streetlight glow coming through the window. I heard a steady series of cracks along the wall behind me. I sat up and flicked on a small lamp. As soon as the light filled the space, the cracking stopped. The silence that followed made me uncomfortable. My chest felt tight, and I noticed a tense feeling at the back of my neck. I stood up and walked over to the wall, pressing my ear against it. It just felt cold. No noise, no movement. I waited for a full minute, then gave up and got a glass of water before trying to sleep again. In the morning, I checked the wall more carefully. This time, there were more of those tiny grooves. They formed a short vertical line about 6 inches tall. I didn't remember seeing a line the day before, so this was new. The plaster looked cracked at the edges of those little marks like they'd been forced open. I felt uneasy. I ran my hand along the wall and felt a few of the grooves catch on my fingertips. The line seemed too purposeful to be random cracks. But I had work to do, so I tried to ignore it. I went back to my painting and spent the day focusing on the details of the street corner. That afternoon, I noticed an odd feeling while I was painting. It was like someone was staring at me from across the room. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something, but the place was empty. Each time I turned back to my canvas, I felt a prickling sensation on my skin. My stomach churned a bit. By early evening, I was so uneasy that I decided to paint over the wall where the marks were. I figured I would just get some primer and cover the whole section. Maybe that would settle my nerves. I dragged out a can of primer and a wide brush. I taped off the floor to avoid drips. When I applied the first coat, the bristles got stuck in the grooves. It was like painting rough stone. The tension in my chest grew worse. My breathing felt shallow. Halfway through, I thought I heard a faint whisper, but I couldn't make out words. It sounded like someone breathing out very close to my ear. I stopped and looked around, but no one was there. I forced myself to finish the primer coat. After that, I cleaned up, made a quick dinner, and tried to distract myself with a book. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind outside the window rattled the panes. Around midnight, I heard a soft voice inside my head. It said my name in a low tone, stretched out and quiet. My heart thundered. I sat up in bed, beads of sweat forming on my forehead. The hair on my arms stood up. I knew I was alone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the voice was in the room. I thought maybe stress was getting to me. I told myself it was my imagination. Eventually, I drifted off, but my sleep was restless. The next morning, I went straight to the wall to see if the primer had dried properly. I was sure I'd covered every inch of the surface, but the marks were still visible. The paint had clung to the edges, forming a rough outline around them. They seemed sharper now, like the grooves had grown deeper. The vertical line was more pronounced. I noticed faint shapes branching out from it, almost like tiny arms or branches. It made me nervous. I grabbed my brush again and tried another layer, but the paint kept sliding off the grooves. No matter how many strokes I used, the untals remained. By the afternoon, I started hearing the whispering more clearly. It was like an echo inside my head, but it came from the wall. The voice shifted between low murmurs and hissing sounds. I couldn't make out full sentences, but I caught words like fear and failure. It kept mentioning my doubts about my artwork. My stomach felt twisted. My hands shook when I tried to paint on my canvas. I messed up the sky in my street corner scene. The brush slipped and I smeared a dark streak across the buildings. I shouted in frustration and tossed the brush down. My throat was tight and my breathing was ragged. I decided to leave the apartment for a while. I walked around the block, grabbed a coffee, and tried to calm down. The fresh air helped me breathe a bit easier. By the time I got back, it was late afternoon. The hallway light still flickered as I opened my door. Inside, everything was the same, except the untals looked even deeper. Now they formed something like a twisted face. The mouth shape was open, and I could almost see a faint curve where eyes would be. My skin went cold. I felt sweat under my arms and down my back. I picked up the brush and tried to paint over it again. As soon as the bristles touched the wall, a soft voice hissed in my ear. It said something about my hands shaking. It said I wouldn't ever paint anything worthwhile. My heart hammered and I pressed the brush harder, trying to block out the voice. But it got louder, filling my head with taunts. My vision blurred for a moment. My pulse was racing, and I felt like I might pass out. I took a step back. The paint on the wall started to drip, as if something was pushing it away from the grooves. Over the next few days, I barely slept. The noises at night got more intense. Sometimes the wall popped so loudly it woke me up in a panic. The grooves kept expanding, forming new lines and shapes. Some looked like symbols, some looked like distorted faces, and some I couldn't identify. They had sharp angles and rough edges. The surface of the wall looked warped around them, like the plaster was bending outward. Whenever I tried to paint or spackle over them, it would look fine for a few minutes, then the material would crack and peel away. I heard more whispering each time. It spoke about my doubts, my worries, and my failures. It made my skin crawl and my head hurt. One evening, around 10, I was standing in front of the wall with a hammer in my hand. I planned to chip away the damaged plaster and patch it up. I lifted the hammer and struck the wall. A chunk of plaster fell away, revealing a darker layer underneath. It wasn't wood or brick. It looked like old stone. The marks were etched into it, and they seemed deeper than before. When I touched that stone layer, I felt a low vibration. It made my palm tingle. I jerked my hand back. My chest felt heavy, and I broke out in a cold sweat. The voice in my head called me a coward. I shouted at the wall, telling it to shut up. My throat felt dry. I swung the hammer again, but as soon as it hit, I heard a low thud from behind the stone, like something hitting back. My arms trembled, and I dropped the hammer. A wave of nausea ran through me. It felt like the floor was tilting under my feet. I thought I might pass out, but I forced myself to stay upright. My breathing was fast, and my heart pounded so hard I could feel my pulse in my neck. Another thud came from the other side of the wall, deeper this time. It reverberated through the room. I grabbed my phone to call someone, but I realized I didn't know who to call. The landlord? The police? What would I say? That my wall was making noises? I doubted anyone would believe me. My stomach twisted, I was sweating all over. My clothes clung to my skin. The voice kept taunting me. It told me I was alone, that nobody would help me. I slammed my fist against the wall. The surface felt cold and unyielding, but I heard a rumbling behind the stone, like something shifting. My throat went tight and I backed away. I could barely think straight. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the cot staring at the wall, waiting for whatever was on the other side to break through. The Untalis looked huge in the dim light from the lamp. They formed twisted patterns that stretched from the baseboard almost to the ceiling now. I kept hearing faint whispers. Give up. You're not good enough. You'll fail. Each word made my heart pound harder. I tried to drown them out by thinking about my old paintings, my successes, anything positive. But the voice pressed on, reminding me of every bad piece I'd made, every criticism I'd received. Around 3 in the morning, I stood up. My legs shook as I walked to the wall. I pressed my ear against it. The surface felt ice cold. My breath caught in my throat when I heard a raspy sound, like breathing on the other side. I pushed away and nearly tripped over my own feet. My head was spinning. My lips felt dry. I wanted to leave the apartment, but I also felt drawn to stay. It was like I needed to confront whatever was happening. When the sun came up, I felt a surge of desperation. I couldn't spend another day watching these marks grow. I grabbed a crowbar from my toolbox, intending to pry off the plaster until I could see what was underneath. I jammed the crowbar into the gap where I'd chipped away the plaster. Bits of debris fell to the floor. My teeth clenched, and I put all my strength into it. I heard a crack and a crunch as more chunks of plaster broke away, revealing more of the dark stone. The grooves were there, deeper and more complex, winding in and out of each other. The voice in my head roared like static. It got louder, chanting my fears. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the crowbar. Then I felt another thud from behind the stone, heavier than before. The vibration traveled up my arms. The crowbar slipped, and I lost my grip. It clattered to the floor. The rumble from inside the wall seemed to roll through the room. My ears popped. I couldn't catch my breath. I stumbled backward and leaned against my easel. A canvas fell to the floor with a dull thump. I felt my heart banging against my chest. The hair on my arms stood on end. Every instinct told me to get out. I steadied myself and walked to the door. My hands fumbled with the lock and I yanked it open. Before I stepped into the hallway, I turned around for one last look at the wall. The Untalis formed several faces, each one twisted in a silent snarl. The stone behind them looked like it was pulsing. I heard one more soft rumble, like something breathing in the darkness. My mouth felt dry. My fingers were numb and I could barely swallow. I left the studio without bothering to grab my paintings or even my jacket. I just needed to be away from the wall. I stood in the hallway for a few seconds, heart pounding, breath coming in short gasps. My clothes were drenched in sweat. I could hear my pulse in my ears. I stared at the flickering light bulb, trying to slow my breathing. I wondered if I was losing my mind, or if there really was something behind that wall. The memory of the rumbling made my stomach turn. I had never felt anything like that before. It wasn't a normal house noise. It felt alive. After a while, I headed down the stairs, one trembling step at a time. I could still sense something behind me. The floor creaked under my weight, and the sound made my nerves jump. My thoughts were jumbled. I felt a desperate need to talk to someone who knew about old buildings or renovations. But deep down, I knew that no matter what anyone said, I couldn't explain that feeling, that voice, or those shapes. My body still felt the echoes of the thud from behind the stone, like a slow drumbeat in my chest. I reached the bottom of the stairs and pushed open the door to the street. The air outside was cool and smelled faintly of gasoline and wet pavement. My legs felt weak as I walked a few steps. I leaned against a lamppost, catching my breath. I stared up at the windows of the old building. From the sidewalk, nothing looked strange. The building was just another old structure with peeling paint and a worn-out exterior. Nobody passing by could guess what was inside that one studio. My heart still raced. My hands were clammy. My back ached from tension. I felt a tingling at the base of my neck, like someone was standing right behind me. I turned quickly, but nobody was there. I looked at the second-floor windows again. One had a broken shutter, and the paint on the frame was chipped. I pictured the wall inside, full of grooves, faces, and lines. My stomach tightened. I could still hear the whispering in my mind, faint but persistent, telling me I wasn't good enough, telling me I should just give up. I rubbed my forehead, trying to block it out. I knew I couldn't stay in that studio. The rent was cheap, but no amount of money was worth dealing with those noises and that creeping feeling of something alive behind the wall. Part of me wanted to rush back in and smash it until I found what was hidden there. But I couldn't face that rumbling again. I felt weak and exhausted. My face was flushed, and I realized I was breathing too fast, almost hyperventilating. I tried to calm down, inhaling and exhaling slowly. I lingered there for a few minutes, not sure where to go. Eventually, I forced myself to walk down the street. My footsteps felt heavy, and the voices in my head faded a bit as I put distance between myself and that building. I still felt unsettled, like I had left something unfinished. But I couldn't go back. Not after everything I'd heard and felt. I didn't know what would happen to that wall or whatever was behind it, but I knew I had to get away. I kept walking, my eyes on the cracked sidewalk beneath my feet, trying to focus on each step, trying not to think about the faces that had appeared in the plaster. My chest felt tight, and I realized my breathing was still shallow. I told myself I would find another place to work, somewhere with plain walls and decent light, somewhere quiet. Anything to escape those creeping grooves and the whispers that poured my own fears into my ears. By the time I reached the next block, I could barely see the building if I looked back. The walls of the surrounding shops blocked most of the view. I forced my eyes forward. I didn't want to look back. My feet kept moving, one in front of the other, while the echo of that last rumble stayed in my mind. It kept playing on repeat, reminding me that something was behind that wall, and it wasn't just my imagination. I hoped I'd never hear that noise again. But even as I walked away, I had this feeling in my gut that the marks would keep growing, whether I was there to see them or not. And that was enough to make my heart keep pounding all the way down the street. I arrived at the beach around midday, hoping for a few hours of daylight before I set up my tent. I had been driving along the coast for several days, searching for places with minimal foot traffic. The name of this particular spot never appeared in any travel guides I had read, which made me even more interested in exploring it. The shore stretched for what looked like miles, covered in pale sand that stayed damp no matter where I stepped. The water was calm, with small waves rolling in every few seconds. There were cliffs in the distance, but here the land was flat. I saw no parking lots, no shops, and no houses. Just sand, water, and a few scattered rocks. I felt an immediate sense of solitude. That was all I wanted at first. I thought it would give me space to take unique photographs. I pulled my car off the narrow road and parked on a patch of bare ground near some dunes. I grabbed my backpack, camera bag, and tent, then walked toward the shore. The sun felt strong on my back, and there was a breeze carrying the smell of salt. I wasn't worried about tides at that moment. I just wanted to find a good spot to set up camp. Once I reached the middle of the beach, I found a patch of firm sand where I could pitch my tent. I didn't see another soul on that entire stretch, which pleased me. I set down my gear and took out my camera to get a few test shots. I spent about 30 minutes shooting wide angles of the sea, the sky, and the distant cliffs. My plan was to capture the sunset later. Right then, the sun was still high, and the light was too bright for the exact images I wanted. The wind picked up a bit, so I decided to secure my tent first. I hammered down the stakes, careful to get the tent as stable as possible because I didn't want a sudden gust to blow it away. Time passed, and I noticed the sunlight getting softer. I grabbed my camera again and moved closer to the water. When I got near the waterline, I saw footprints in the sand. At first, I thought they might be mine, but I realized they were bigger. They started right at the water's edge, as if whoever left them had walked straight out of the ocean. The footprints continued toward the middle of the beach, then stopped. There was no sign of them turning or heading back. They just ended. I felt uneasy. It was strange to see footprints appear out of nowhere and then vanish. I looked around, trying to spot someone, but the entire beach was empty. I walked along the footprints, counting them. Each one looked deep, the way footprints do on wet sand. I assumed maybe the person had jumped into a boat or something else, but I didn't see anything out on the water. Still, I shrugged it off and went back to taking photos. As the evening approached, I noticed no new footprints had appeared. High tide was rising, and the older footprints near the waterline started to wash away. I returned to my tent, organized my gear, and prepared a simple meal with a portable stove. I ate while sitting on a small folding stool, listening to the waves. The noise of the sea was constant and the wind was steady. Apart from that, everything seemed peaceful. When night fell, I zipped myself into my tent. I had a small flashlight, which I kept on a hook at the top of the tent. I checked some of my recent photos on my camera's screen. After a while, I turned off the flashlight, laid down, and tried to sleep. At first, I could only hear the waves. The sound was repetitive, which usually helps me relax. But a few hours later, I woke up to a faint noise. It sounded like slow steps circling my tent. The sand outside was soft and damp, so I expected it to muffle most footfalls. Yet, I heard a crunching sound. At first I thought it was wind rattling the tent fabric, but the pattern was too irregular. I sat up, heart pounding. I reached for my flashlight and turned it on, pointing it around inside. I listened, holding my breath. The steps sounded close, maybe a foot or two away from the fabric, but I didn't see any silhouettes outside. I slowly unzipped the tent door and shined the beam around the immediate area. There was nothing there. No person, no animal. I checked the sand for footprints. There was a faint impression that could have been a footprint, but I wasn't sure. My pulse felt loud in my ears. I waited a bit, scanning the beach with my light. I didn't see anything unusual, so I zipped the tent closed again. Sleep was difficult after that. Every small noise made me tense up. I told myself it was just the wind or maybe some shifting sand. Eventually, I must have dozed off because I opened my eyes and saw light coming through the tent fabric. Morning was here. I crawled out, blinking in the sunshine. The air was cool, and there was a thin layer of mist in the distance. I looked around the tent. I didn't see fresh footprints, but the wind had blown some loose sand around, making it hard to tell. I decided to focus on my photography. I walked up and down the shoreline, capturing the early light. Every few minutes I glanced back at my camp, worried that I might see someone there, but the beach remained empty. I told myself to stay calm. I had a goal: take unique photos for a magazine pitch. This spot had potential. I was determined not to be spooked by small noises or weird footprints. Around noon, I reviewed the pictures on my camera, trying to figure out the best angles for sunset. Then I noticed something in a shot I had taken earlier that morning. In the background, near the edge of the frame, there was a blurry shape. It was near the water, and it looked like a figure. I zoomed in, but the shape was too out of focus to identify. It bothered me. I wanted to believe it was just a trick of the light. I spent the rest of the day walking back and forth, watching the waves. I didn't see new footprints on the sand, but high tide would have erased anything recent. When the sun started going down again, I placed my tripod at a promising spot, hoping to catch the changing colors of the sky. The sunset was beautiful, with orange and pink hues along the horizon. I took several long exposure shots. After the sun dipped below the water, I carried my gear back to the tent. I cooked a second quick meal. The taste wasn't great, but I was too hungry to care. Then I organized my camera equipment, swapped memory cards, and made sure my batteries were charging from the portable charger. By the time I finished, darkness had settled in completely. The wind was stronger than the previous night. The tent walls flapped, creating a low rustling noise. I listened for footsteps but heard none. I zipped myself into the sleeping bag, telling myself I just needed rest. A few hours later, I heard the steps again. It was the same slow movement around my tent. I held my breath, listening carefully. The steps went around in circles. I felt my skin prickle and my throat go dry. My heart was racing. My body tensed up. I whispered to myself that I had to check. I grabbed my flashlight again. This time I opened the tent quickly and shined the beam all around. The light fell on flat, empty sand. No one was there. The area was still, just the sound of waves and wind. but I felt sure I had heard something. I walked around my campsite, scanning the ground for fresh prints. The sand near the tent had a few vague impressions, but nothing distinct. I knew I hadn't made those marks. The shape wasn't the same size as my own feet, and it seemed spaced in a pattern that suggested someone had walked in a circle. My legs felt weak, and I realized I was trembling. I forced myself to calm down, took a deep breath, and returned to the tent. I didn't sleep well at all. By morning, I was tired and felt on edge. I considered leaving, but I also felt a stubborn desire to solve this mystery. I went to the shoreline to take more photos. As I walked, I spotted a new set of footprints leading away from the ocean. They weren't my size. They were slightly bigger, the same size as the ones I saw that first day. I followed them. They led to the same spot on the beach where they just stopped. My stomach felt tight. The sand around the final footprint looked undisturbed. There was no sign of a tunnel or anything else. It was just flat beach after that last mark. I spent part of that afternoon checking the dunes and the area behind the beach. I found no signs of recent activity. No tire tracks, no footpaths, no campsite. As the day wore on, the feeling of being watched got stronger. Sometimes I turned around, thinking I'd see a person standing there. But each time, the beach was empty. The wind kept blowing and the waves kept rolling, as if nothing unusual was happening. That night, I gathered my nerve. I told myself I would stay awake to confront whoever was messing with me. I set up a small lantern outside the tent, aimed my camera in that direction, and attached a motion-activated trigger I sometimes use for wildlife photography. I sat inside my tent, the flaps slightly open, watching the camera feed on my phone via a wireless connection. The night dragged on. Hours passed and I nearly nodded off several times, but I kept jostling myself awake. Close to midnight, I heard a faint crunch in the sand again. On my camera screen, I saw nothing, but I heard the steps. My heart pounded, and sweat ran down my face. I gripped my phone, waiting for the motion sensor to kick in. Still nothing on screen. The steps circled the tent, just outside the lantern's glow. I felt cornered. I yanked my flashlight off my belt and lunged out of the tent. The beach was empty. The lantern illuminated a small circle of sand, but no footprints formed. The sound faded. I pointed the flashlight in every direction. I wanted to shout, but something about the silence stopped me. Eventually, I crawled back in, my nerves shot. I switched off my gear and lay there. I couldn't sleep. My mind wouldn't rest. Every small noise outside sounded like footsteps. By morning, I felt weak. I cooked a small meal, forced myself to eat, then took a walk near the water. The air felt colder than before, and the sky had a dull gray color. As I walked, I noticed a fresh line of footprints heading back toward the ocean. They started in the middle of the beach and went straight to the waterline, the opposite of what I had seen on previous mornings. I decided to follow them. Each step looked solid, pressed deep into the damp sand. I reached the final print at the edge of the shore. I stood there looking at the waves. I watched the water wash over the footprints, slowly fading them. Then I noticed something odd in the surf. It was my own reflection, but it looked off. The image in the water wasn't matching my movements exactly. I bent down, squinting. My reflection seemed to smile at me, but I wasn't smiling. Then it lifted a hand as if waving. I felt cold. My chest tightened. My arms felt heavy. The reflection's face was my face, but twisted into a grin. No sound came from the water, but I felt a creeping sensation at the back of my neck. I stood there, not sure what to do. The reflection's mouth moved in a mocking way, like silent laughter. My heart thumped. My scalp tingled. The waves surged, and the image distorted, then vanished. For a second, I stood there waiting to see if it would return. But all I saw was shifting water. I stepped backward, breathing in quick bursts. My legs shook. I felt exposed and vulnerable. I snapped a few photos of the shoreline and the spot where I had seen the strange reflection, but I already knew nothing would show up in the pictures. The water was just water. The footprints had almost disappeared, wiped away by the tide. I realized my hands were trembling so badly I could hardly hold the camera. I turned and walked back to my campsite, forcing myself to stay alert. I expected to see footprints behind me, but the only ones were mine. When I got to the tent, I started packing up my gear. My instincts told me I needed to leave. The sense of being watched felt more intense than ever. My pulse was still rapid, and I felt short of breath. I looked over my shoulder repeatedly, convinced I'd see someone standing there, but the beach stayed empty. I took down the tent, folded it up, and hurried to my car. I kept glancing back, scanning the shore. It was silent except for the wind and the rolling waves. I loaded everything into the trunk and slammed it shut. My heart was still beating fast. I wasn't sure what I had witnessed, but I knew I wouldn't stay another night. Before I started the engine, I paused and looked at the beach one last time. The tide had crept up, reaching the exact spot where the footprints had started that morning. The sand was smooth again, no evidence of those mysterious tracks. I tried to rationalize it. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of the water and then vanished in the same place. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and finally turned on the ignition. I left that remote beach behind, certain I wouldn't return. Even now I can recall the crunch of those invisible steps at night and the silent grin of that face in the water. I still don't know what happened out there, but I remember the chill in my bones and how my body reacted, even when my mind tried to deny it. That's all there is to it. I went looking for inspiration and found something else entirely. I never got any answers. I only know that those footprints came from the ocean, and whoever made them disappeared. Or maybe they never left at all. I noticed something unsettling about this house the moment I stepped through the front door. The floors felt uneven, and the air smelled stale. I heard a creaking noise above me that made me look up at the ceiling. I figured the attic might hold some old junk, but I saw it as a chance to find pieces I could flip for a profit. I'm an antiques seller, and every hidden corner in an old place can be a gold mine. That thought kept me curious and a little on edge. I didn't like the flickering light in the hallway or the way my new home seemed to breathe around me, but I shrugged it off and got to work unpacking. I tried not to think about the heaviness in the air. I spent the first few days settling in. The house wasn't too large, but it had a few rooms I could use as storage. One morning I felt a surge of determination. I grabbed a flashlight and headed upstairs to the attic. The stairs creaked with each step. The attic door stuck for a moment and I had to shove it with my shoulder. When it finally gave, a damp, musty smell hit me in the face. Stacks of dusty boxes and old furniture were piled in every corner, covered in cobwebs. I coughed, waved the dust away, and walked in, shining my flashlight around. I saw a couple of worn trunks against the far wall. My eyes lit up because trunks sometimes hold valuables or vintage items. The first trunk was empty except for some moth-eaten blankets. The second one had a set of chipped dishes and a small wooden jewelry box with a broken latch. I didn't see anything worth more than a few bucks. My flashlight swept across a row of shelves, where I spotted something peeking out from under a rag. I pulled the rag away and found a mask. It looked like it was made of some kind of dark wood with carved lines and symbols I didn't recognize. It had 2 narrow eye slits and a faint sheen, like it was polished. I picked it up, intending to examine it more closely. The moment my fingers touched the mask, a chill ran up my arm. My shoulders tensed. The wood felt colder than everything else in the attic. It didn't feel damp, just cold. My flashlight flickered, and I felt a sudden need to put the mask down, but I didn't. I turned it over in my hands. There were markings on the inside, as though someone had carved out small designs behind where a person's face would rest. I brought it closer to my eyes and noticed they seemed deliberate, maybe ceremonial. My heart pounded and I couldn't explain why. I told myself I was just tired, that I'd had too much coffee, but the urge to drop the mask kept growing. I wrapped it in the rag and brought it downstairs to my workshop. I planned to clean it up, research it, maybe list it for sale. I set it on my desk and tried to search online for similar masks. I couldn't find anything that looked like it. The closest I found were tribal or ceremonial masks from various parts of the world, but none had the same exact symbols. After a while, I felt my eyes getting heavy, so I decided to lock it away for the night. I found an old chest in the living room, placed the mask inside, and snapped the lock shut. That night I stayed up late organizing other antiques. Around midnight, I heard a faint knocking sound. At first I thought it was the radiator or the pipes, but the knocking continued, steady and light, coming from the direction of the living room. The hairs on my arms stood up. I realized it was coming from inside the chest where I had placed the mask. I froze in place, breathing fast. I wondered if maybe something had shifted inside. Then the knocking stopped. I waited in silence, straining my ears, but everything went quiet. I told myself to go check, but I couldn't move. I finally convinced myself I must have been imagining it. I forced myself to get some sleep. The next morning, I walked into the living room. The chest was still locked. No scratches, no signs of tampering. I felt a wave of relief. I started my usual routine, made coffee, and got ready for the day. But when I went into my workshop, I almost dropped my mug. The mask was there, on my desk, propped up against the wall, facing me. I stared at it. It was impossible. I'd locked it away. I double-checked my pocket for the chest key. It was there. I couldn't explain how the mask got out. I swallowed hard and picked it up. It felt just as cold as before. I marched back into the living room, unlocked the chest, and looked inside. Empty. I put the mask back, locked it again, and took a few deep breaths. I felt a hollow sensation in my stomach. I decided I wouldn't let it get to me. I had to work. I called a friend to ask if he knew anything about ceremonial masks. I told him I'd found something strange and needed an expert's eye. He said he'd check around, maybe connect me with a collector. I tried to forget about the mask for the rest of the day. That night, I woke up to a faint scraping sound. My heart raced. I realized it was coming from the hallway near my bedroom door. I sat up, not sure if I should call the police or investigate. My breathing felt shallow. I grabbed a small flashlight and stepped into the hall. The floorboards creaked under my feet. I saw something at the far end of the hallway resting on the floor. I walked closer, my stomach in knots. The mask was lying there, face up, staring at the ceiling. I felt cold sweat running down my back. My hands shook as I picked it up. Once again, it was out of the chest. I took it downstairs, stuck it in the chest, and locked it again. This time, I placed a heavy statue on top of the lid. I figured that would keep it secure. In the morning, I noticed something strange on my face when I looked in the bathroom mirror. 3 faint lines ran from my left temple to my jaw. They weren't cuts, but they looked like some kind of scrape or rash. They didn't hurt, but they gave me a jolt of fear. I splashed water on my face, tried to wipe them away, but they didn't go anywhere. I felt my throat tighten. I was sure I'd gone to bed without any marks. I left the bathroom and checked the chest in the living room. It was open. The lock lay on the floor intact. The statue I'd placed on the lid was sitting next to it. The mask was gone. My breathing turned ragged, and I gripped the edge of the chest until my knuckles turned white. I searched the entire house, calling out curses as I walked from room to room. In the attic, I found the mask on a shelf. It sat upright, tilted slightly, looking toward the entrance, as if waiting for me. My heart pounded so hard it made my chest hurt. My mouth went dry. I grabbed the mask and held it at arm's length. I took it back downstairs, locked it in a cabinet in my workshop, and then locked the workshop door. I told myself I was done messing around. I didn't care if I could sell it for $1,000, I wanted it gone, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it in the trash. That night I could barely sleep. Every sound made me jump. Day by day, I felt the house pushing down on me. I heard footsteps on the stairs when I was in the kitchen. I felt a breeze in a room with closed windows. I started to dread going to sleep because each morning I'd find more small lines on my face, or sometimes on my arms. It felt like something was tracing me in the night, trying to leave a permanent mark. My appetite faded. I paced around, checking every lock, every door. One evening, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and barely recognized myself. I looked older, worn down. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? A possessed mask keeps moving around my house and scratching me in my sleep. They'd dismiss me or tell me to see a doctor. I tried to record the night with my phone camera. I set it up in my bedroom facing the bed. I fell asleep with the lights on, jumpy and tense. In the morning, the camera was on the floor. The battery was dead. I replayed what little footage remained. There was static, a few moments of me sleeping, then nothing. It didn't catch anything unusual. But I woke up with 2 new lines on the side of my neck, close to my ear. I felt my hands shake when I touched them. They felt slightly raised, but not painful. The next day I decided I needed to stay awake at least one full night to see what was happening. I drank coffee and energy drinks, sat in the living room, and forced my eyes open. I heard knocking inside the walls around 1 a.m. I forced myself to investigate. I walked through the rooms and ended up in the workshop. The locked cabinet was standing there. I reached out and touched the handle. It felt ice cold. The door was locked, but I heard faint scratching from within. My hands trembled as I turned the key. When I opened the cabinet, the mask wasn't there. The scratching sound stopped. I felt dizzy. I stumbled into the hallway, shining my flashlight around. I finally saw a dim shape in the corner near the stairs. I moved closer and found the mask lying on its side. I grabbed it and carried it with me. I decided to hold on to it until morning and get rid of it first thing. I walked to the living room, set the mask on a small table in front of me, and kept my eyes on it. It felt like a standoff. I didn't blink much. I heard the house creak around me. My neck stiffened. I felt like my body was bracing for a fight. Around 4 a.m., I felt myself nodding off despite the caffeine. A sudden vibration made my eyes snap open. The mask was gone. I jumped to my feet, my pulse pounding in my ears. I heard a hum from the hallway. My flashlight beam swung around, and I followed the sound. It was low, steady, like a distant generator. It led me to the spare bedroom where I almost dropped the flashlight at what I saw. The mask was hanging on the wall, directly facing a mirror. The hum was coming from it, like a soft buzz. I stepped closer, feeling like I was walking through thick air. In the reflection, the mask seemed different. The wood looked darker. The eyes appeared wider. It had a strange texture around the mouth area, like fur or hair. My stomach tightened. I couldn't breathe right. I stood in front of the mask, staring at the reflection, and for a split second I saw a faint movement in the mirror. It wasn't me. It looked like the mask was pulsing. My hands felt clammy. My mind was telling me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The buzzing grew louder. I tried to focus on the actual mask on the wall, and it looked the same as always, cold and wooden. But in the mirror, it appeared alive. My reflection looked pale. I leaned in, and I could see my face next to what looked like a beastly shape. I felt a tingling in my cheeks, like invisible fingers pressing into my skin. I fought the urge to drop to my knees. My legs shook. The air in the room felt heavy, almost suffocating. I clenched my fists and I heard a guttural sound, like something growling from inside the glass. I forced myself to grab the mask with both hands. It felt like ice. My teeth were chattering. The buzzing grew more intense, like a swarm of insects inside my skull. My vision blurred for a moment. I shut my eyes and pulled the mask away from the wall. The humming cut off abruptly, and the entire room felt silent and dead. My lungs burned as I gasped for air. I stumbled backward, hugging the mask tight to my chest, not sure what to do next. I turned, walked out of that room, and went downstairs. My thoughts were jumbled, but I knew I had to get rid of it. I unlocked the back door and stepped outside into the cold night air. My hands shook so much I almost dropped the mask. I stood there, staring into the darkness, planning to toss it as far as I could. But I stopped. Some part of me was afraid of what might happen if I just threw it away. Maybe it would come back, or maybe I'd find it in my bed. I felt dizzy and sick. My heart hammered in my chest. I walked back in, set the mask on the kitchen table, and sank into a chair. I stared at it until the first light of dawn came through the window. I listened for any more sounds, but heard only the usual morning quiet. My entire body ached from tension. I looked at my reflection in the window and saw new lines on my face, darker than before. I felt them with my fingertips. My skin felt raw. My mouth felt dry as I realized I had no plan. I just knew I couldn't stay in this house with that thing. Now, I'm sitting here waiting for a local collector to show up. I asked him to come by and take this mask off my hands. I told him I'd sell it cheap. I didn't mention the strange things happening. I just want it gone. Every so often I feel a sensation on my skin, like something brushing against it. I keep looking around, hoping I won't see the mask somewhere else in the room. It's still on the kitchen table facing me, the eye slits empty and cold. I wish I'd never opened that attic door. I wish I'd never brought it downstairs. If this collector doesn't show up soon, I might just drive to the nearest river and toss it in. I don't know if that would fix anything, but it might give me some peace. I'm not sure what I'll do if it doesn't leave. I'm not sleeping right, I'm not thinking straight. Every part of me aches and I jump at every noise. I just want to go back to a normal routine. I hope I can get rid of it today. If not, I'll pack up whatever I can and leave this place behind. I don't care about selling antiques or making money anymore. I just want to wake up tomorrow without fresh marks on my skin or a mask staring at me from the corner of the room. That's all I want. That's all I can think about now. I spotted the piano on a rainy afternoon at a small auction house outside the city. The sign on the sidewalk looked worn, and the windows were dark. I had gone there because I'm always on the lookout for unusual instruments. I walked in and smelled old wood, dust, and something faintly damp like a cellar after a flood. My eyes landed on that piano right away. It was shoved against the back wall. The lid looked scratched, and one leg had a deep gouge. The keys were yellowed and a few were chipped. I asked the auctioneer about it. He shrugged and said they'd gotten it from an estate sale. No backstory, no paperwork, and no idea who had owned it before. It was big, upright, and silent, but I felt an urge to buy it. I thought maybe I could restore it. Maybe I could find something special in it. I won the piano for a low price. Nobody else wanted it. They helped me load it onto a truck and I drove it to my small house on the edge of town. I set it up in a spare room where I keep my music equipment. That first day I lifted the lid, checked the strings, and pressed a few keys. It sounded rough, like it needed tuning. The inside smelled like old varnish and stale air. I noticed that the hammers had some moisture damage, but nothing that made it unplayable. I thought I could fix it up with time. That first week, I left it alone. I was busy with other projects and I figured I'd get around to it after sorting through my schedule. But by the third night, I began to hear something. I woke around 2 a.m. because I heard a low note. Just one note, like someone pressing a single key in a slow, deliberate way. It took me a few seconds to realize I wasn't dreaming. I sat up. I stared at the dark hallway. My heart raced, and I felt a light sweat forming on the back of my neck. I listened. I didn't hear anything else. I thought maybe it was the wind. My house sometimes creaks at night, so I told myself it was just an odd noise from the walls. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep well. The next night, the same thing happened. Another deep note. I jumped out of bed and flicked on the lights. It stopped. I walked over to the spare room and found the door locked from the outside. I always keep it locked because I don't want guests messing with my equipment when they visit. Nothing looked disturbed. I stood in the doorway, staring at the piano's outline in the dark. My breathing felt tight, and I got a strange tingling in my stomach. I waited a minute. Nothing else happened, so I locked the door again and went back to bed. I lay awake for a long time, listening to my own heartbeat. On the 4th night, it happened again. This time, It was two notes in a row. Low, then a slightly higher tone. They sounded muffled. I checked the lock on my bedroom door before I went to the spare room. The hallway was quiet. My legs felt shaky, and I could feel my palms starting to sweat. I opened the spare room door. The piano sat in the same spot. The dust cover I'd placed over the keys was still there. Everything else in the room looked the same. I stood there, expecting something to move. Nothing moved. I tried to brush off the feeling, but a nagging thought told me it wasn't just random noise. I shut the door and tried to fall asleep again. Over the next few days, I decided to investigate. I spent my afternoon free time inspecting the piano. I removed the front panel to see if anything was loose or broken. I checked the strings, the hammers, the pedals. I found nothing unusual besides the normal wear. I tightened some screws and wiped away some dust clumps. I tried to see if there was any sign of a hidden mechanism, or if some old rodent nest could be causing weird noises. But the inside looked empty, aside from the expected hardware. I decided to record any sounds during the night. I set up a small recorder near the piano before I went to sleep. The next morning, I played back the recording. I heard some faint creaks of the house, a car passing outside, and then, around 2:10 a.m., 3 piano notes. They were scattered and low. It sounded almost random, then silence. I listened to that part over and over. I tried to figure out if it formed a pattern. It didn't seem to, but I felt a sense of unease when I heard those notes. My stomach tightened, and I had goosebumps. My mind raced with questions. Could someone have gotten in? Why would they only press a few keys? The door was locked. The windows were shut. It didn't make sense. I tried not to overreact, but the following night, it happened again. I jumped out of bed as soon as I heard the first note. I ran down the hall and I saw faint light under the spare room door. That made no sense because I kept that light off. I reached for the knob, but my hand was trembling. I twisted it. The room was dark inside. The light was off. The piano looked the same. The dust cover was folded on top of the piano. It was folded differently than I remembered, like someone had lifted it and then placed it back in a hurry. I felt a cold sweat run down my back. I moved closer and I ran my hand over the keys. They felt smooth, a little cold. I pressed a key, and it sounded normal, though flat. Then I felt a sudden heaviness in the room, like the air was thicker. I backed away and switched on the overhead light. Everything looked normal, but I didn't sleep well that night. A few days later, I started getting fragments of a tune stuck in my head. It happened while I was washing dishes one morning. I caught myself humming a short phrase. It sounded unfinished. Then I realized I didn't recognize it. I tried to recall where I'd heard it. Nothing came to mind except the random notes from the piano. The next day, the same fragment popped into my head while I was driving. It was 5 or 6 notes going up and then slightly down. I felt a strange urge to go home and play them on that piano. I pushed that thought aside because it felt weird, but it kept crawling back every time I had a free moment. That evening, I decided to try playing the piano for the first time in days. I pulled away the dust cover, sat on the old wooden bench, and tested some scales. The lower keys sounded resonant but slightly out of tune. The upper keys were a bit sharp. I played the fragment I'd been hearing in my head. It made a short phrase. I repeated it. It felt like the piano responded. I can't explain how I knew that. Maybe it was just my own nerves. Still, I felt an odd pressure in my chest. My hand shook as I ran through the phrase again. Something about the notes sounded incomplete, like the piano wanted more. But I had no idea what came next. For the next week, that phrase kept coming to me at random times. Sometimes I'd be in the shower, and I'd catch myself humming it. Other times, I'd be listening to music in my living room, and I'd realize I was tapping out the rhythm. At night, I had trouble sleeping. I'd wake up, and I'd hear a note or two from the spare room, but always so faint I wondered if I was imagining it. I kept the door locked. I checked the house for signs of a break-in. Everything was secure, yet the notes persisted. They were always slow and low. like someone was trying to get my attention without wanting to wake the entire neighborhood. I grew more nervous. My chest felt tight every night. I set up more recording equipment, hoping to capture longer segments of sound, but each time I'd only get a few isolated notes. One early morning, I listened to the new recording and heard something else. Between the notes, there was a hushed noise. It sounded like words. I couldn't make them out, but it gave me a chill. My skin prickled and my mouth went dry. I replayed it again. I couldn't catch the exact phrases, but they seemed like quiet whispers, maybe 2 or 3 different voices. I rushed to the piano, opened the front panel, and stared inside. It was empty. Strings, hammers, no hidden compartments. Nothing moved. My heart pounded, and I noticed my shirt was damp with sweat. That same night, I decided I needed to force the melody out. I set up my phone to record. I sat at the piano. The only light came from a small lamp in the corner of the room. My ears felt tense, like I was bracing for a sudden noise. I started playing the small fragment. I repeated it over and over. I tried to add a few more notes. My hands felt stiff and my breathing quickened. I began fumbling around, searching for the right progression. The house felt too quiet. Each key press echoed. I felt a sense of urgency, like the piano was pushing me to keep going. My vision blurred at the edges, probably from lack of sleep and stress. As I played, I heard something. Between the notes and the tiny rests, there were these faint whispers again. I strained my ears, but I couldn't pick out words. My heart thumped so hard that I felt it in my throat. A chill spread across my back. My fingers trembled on the keys. I kept playing. I wanted to capture whatever was happening. The recorder was running. My phone's red light glowed on the stand. I pressed a wrong key and the chord clashed. I cringed at the dissonance. Suddenly the lid rattled. It made a dull thud from inside. I froze. My foot slid off the pedal. I stared at the piano. My breath caught in my chest. Then I heard another soft thud, like something heavy shifting inside the wooden casing. I stood up so fast I nearly knocked over the bench. I reached for the phone. Before I could grab it, the piano let out a single loud note. It rang out and it didn't fade right away. It sounded rough and out of tune, like the string was under too much tension. My ears rang. I grabbed the phone and stumbled back, knocking into a small table behind me. The lamp toppled and crashed to the floor. The bulb shattered, and the room went dark, except for the phone's dim screen. I scrambled to turn on the overhead light. My hand fumbled along the wall. Finally, I flipped the switch. The piano sat there silent. The final note still echoed in my mind. My pulse hammered. My skin felt clammy. I wanted to leave the house, but I forced myself to approach the piano again. I stood in front of it, chest heaving. I placed my hand on the lid, then lifted it slowly. The strings looked normal. The felt hammers were still. I couldn't see any object inside. Nothing explained that heavy noise. I lowered the lid, then stared at the keys. They looked the same as always, except my hands were shaking too much to see clearly. I felt dizzy and my mouth was dry. I grabbed a bottle of water from the corner and took a few gulps, trying not to drop it. I couldn't think straight. The adrenaline in my body made my hands twitch. My legs felt weak. I needed to sit down. I lowered myself onto the bench and tried to catch my breath. After a few minutes, I remembered the recording. I stopped it and played it back. I heard the familiar fragment, then my attempts to complete it. In the silent gaps, there were the whispers. They sounded more distinct now, like multiple voices under the surface. My spine tingled. Then came that final dissonant note. It was louder on the recording than it had been in person, and after it, I heard what sounded like a scraping movement inside the piano. My stomach churned. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. I decided I needed a break. I locked the spare room and sat in my living room, staring at the wall. My mind replayed that final note and the movement inside the piano. I tapped my foot, unable to calm down. The house felt too quiet. The air seemed stale. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was just after midnight. I realized I didn't want to sleep in the house that night. but I also didn't want to leave in the middle of the night. I spent hours pacing between the living room and the kitchen. I didn't turn off the lights. I felt a need to see everything clearly. I watched the hallway expecting something to move. Nothing moved. Eventually, my eyes burned with fatigue, and I forced myself to lie down on the couch. I listened for any piano notes. I didn't hear any. I drifted in and out of restless half-sleep. Each time I woke, I jumped, heart pounding, but it stayed quiet. When the morning came, I felt weak and groggy. My head hurt,